The moment Luciano De Luca whispered, "I chose you," years ago at their wedding, Lorenza Valenti's world shattered. She had prepared herself for a loveless marriage, a cold transaction between crime families. But nothing prepared her for the truth. Her husband had been watching her since childhood, shadowing her pain, guarding her from the darkness without ever revealing himself. Was it devotion or obsession? Protection or possession? As secrets surface and storms rage, Lorenza must decide whether to run from the man who claimed her heart before she even knew his name, or surrender to a love that began in silence. If you're drawn into Lorenza and Luciano's story, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now, let's begin where it all started, with a wedding that was anything but ordinary. The morning Lorenza Valenti became a bride, the sky bled gray over the Amalfi coast. She stood alone in her childhood bedroom, staring at the wedding dress laid across her bed like a corpse. White silk, delicate lace, a costume for a role she never auditioned for. Through the window, she could see the Mediterranean churning beneath clouds that promised rain, and she thought how fitting it was, that even the weather understood this day was a funeral, not a celebration. 23 years old, and her life had been decided in a conversation she wasn't invited to. The De Luca family has agreed, her father had announced 2 months earlier, his voice flat as he delivered the news over dinner. No preamble, no gentleness, just facts, served cold alongside the osso buco. Luciano De Luca will marry you. The wedding is set for May. Lorenza had frozen, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Around the table, her 3 older brothers continued eating as if their father had merely commented on the weather. Her mother's eyes remained fixed on her plate. "I don't know him," Lorenza had managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You met him once, at the Rossi wedding, years ago." Her father's tone suggested the conversation was over. She had searched her memory desperately. The Rossi wedding, she must have been 15, maybe 16. She recalled a crowded ballroom, forced smiles, her family's associates drinking expensive wine while discussing territories and percentages. She had no memory of Luciano De Luca. "I don't remember it. It doesn't matter." Her father's hand came down on the table, not quite a slam, but close enough. "This union strengthens both families. The agreement is made." And that had been that. In the Valenti family, daughters didn't argue. They didn't protest. They certainly didn't refuse. Lorenza had learned early that her voice was a luxury her family couldn't afford her. In a world built on power and violence, on territories carved out with blood and maintained with fear, a daughter was currency, a bargaining chip, a bridge between empires. She had always known she would be married off eventually, she just hadn't expected it to feel quite so much like being erased. Now, as her mother's seamstress helped her into the dress, Lorenza studied her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back looked like a stranger. Dark hair swept into an elaborate updo, makeup applied with expert precision to hide the shadows under her eyes, the dress transforming her into something beautiful and breakable. "You look perfect, signorina," the seamstress murmured, adjusting the veil. Perfect. The word tasted like ash. The ceremony would be small, her mother had explained. Immediate family only, held at the De Luca estate. No grand cathedral, no hundreds of guests. The families wanted discretion. In their world, spectacle attracted attention, and attention attracted problems. Lorenza had nodded through all the explanations, feeling increasingly like she was watching her life happen to someone else. The car ride to the De Luca estate took 2 hours, winding along coastal roads that hugged cliffs and offered glimpses of the sea far below. Lorenza sat alone in the back seat. Her family would arrive separately, maintaining the pretense of tradition even in this most untraditional arrangement. Her driver, one of her father's men, said nothing, and she was grateful for the silence. As they climbed higher into the hills, the landscape changed. Manicured villages gave way to wilder terrain, ancient olive groves clinging to rocky slopes. The road narrowed, becoming a private drive that snaked through cypress trees before finally emerging at iron gates that swung open at their approach. The De Luca villa sprawled across a promontory like a fortress, all stone and sharp angles, built to withstand sieges both literal and metaphorical. It faced the sea with windows like watchful eyes, isolated enough that screams would never reach the mainland. Lorenza's hands clenched in her lap. The car stopped before a massive wooden door. No one came out to greet her. The driver opened her door, helped her from the vehicle, then drove away without a word, leaving her standing alone on the gravel drive with her small suitcase. everything she was permitted to bring from her old life. The front door opened. A woman emerged, older, severe in black dress and gray hair pulled tight. "Signorina Valenti, I am Signora Costa, the housekeeper. Please come inside." The interior of the villa was as cold as its exterior promised. Marble floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Everything echoed. Lorenza's heels clicked against stone as she followed Signora Costa through corridors that smelled of lemon polish and something older, mustier. History. Secrets. "The ceremony will take place in 1 hour," Signora Costa said without looking back, "in the garden overlooking the sea. Your family has arrived and is waiting in the East Salon. I will show you to your preparation room." Your preparation room, not your room. Lorenza caught the distinction. She was led to a small chamber with a view of the churning Mediterranean. Signora Costa left her there with instructions to be ready when called. Alone again, Lorenza moved to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Below, waves crashed against the rocks with enough force to send spray 50 feet into the air. She wondered, briefly, what would happen if she simply walked out of this room, found the cliffs, and kept walking until there was nothing beneath her but air and water. But she wouldn't, because Valentis didn't run. Valentis didn't break agreements. Valentis paid their debts and kept their word, even when the currency was a daughter's life. A knock at the door made her turn. "It's time, Signorina." The ceremony was exactly as soulless as she'd imagined. The garden had been transformed with white flowers and silk ribbons that whipped in the wind coming off the sea, chairs arranged in neat rows, half empty because there were so few guests. Her family on one side, father, mother, 3 brothers, all wearing expressions of grim satisfaction. On the other side, people she didn't know. DeLuca associates, she assumed. Everyone dressed in expensive black, looking more ready for a funeral than a wedding. At the front, beneath an arch of white roses, stood a priest who looked uncomfortable and a man who could only be Luciano DeLuca. Lorenza's breath caught. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with dark hair and a build that suggested violence held carefully in check. He wore a black suit tailored to perfection, and even from a distance, she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the broad shoulders. He stood with absolute stillness, watching her approach, and something about his gaze made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen in a way she'd never experienced. This was her husband, this stranger. She walked the aisle alone. No father to give her away because this wasn't about her father releasing his claim. This was a transfer of property, plain and simple. Her heels sank slightly into the grass with each step. The wind pulled at her veil. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the faces watching her, judging her, calculating her value. When she reached the altar, Luciano extended his hand. She hesitated for just a moment, long enough that she saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Not impatience, something gentler, almost like understanding. Then she placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers with surprising warmth. The priest began speaking in Latin, words that flowed over her like water, meaningless and ancient. She was supposed to repeat vows she didn't believe in, promise things she had no intention of delivering. Love, honor, cherish. All lies wrapped in ceremony, but when it came time to speak, her voice held steady. "I do." Luciano's turn. His voice was deeper than she'd anticipated, textured with something she couldn't quite name. "I do. You may kiss the bride." This was it. The moment her life officially ended and this new existence began. Luciano turned to face her fully, and Lorenza forced herself to meet his eyes. Dark brown, almost black. Intelligent. Guarded. He lifted her veil slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose. She didn't move. His hands were steady as he cupped her face, tilting it up toward his. She expected him to take, to claim, to demonstrate ownership the way she'd seen other men in this world do with their wives. Instead, he paused, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. Then he leaned close, and his lips brushed her ear. "I chose you years ago," he whispered. Words meant only for her. "This isn't what you think." Before she could process what he'd said, he kissed her, brief, chaste, appropriate for the audience. But his words echoed in her mind, drowning out the polite applause from their families. "I chose you years ago. What the hell did that mean?" The reception was held in the villa's formal dining room, where a table had been set for 20. Lorenza found herself seated beside Luciano at the head of the table, playing the role of newlywed bride while her mind spun with questions she couldn't ask. The meal was elaborate, 7 courses of food she couldn't taste. Around them, conversations happened in low voices, business disguised as celebration. Her father spoke with Luciano's father, 2 patriarchs dividing territories over wine and pasta. Her brothers talked weapons and distribution with De Luca associates. Her mother said nothing, as always. Luciano's hand rested on the table beside hers, close enough that their fingers nearly touched. She studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the man beside her with those whispered words. He was handsome. She couldn't deny that. Sharp features that suggested intelligence and danger in equal measure. But it was more than that. There was something in the way he held himself, a controlled power that reminded her of a blade kept sheathed, dangerous but by choice. "You're not eating," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "I'm not hungry." Understandable. A pause. "This isn't how I wanted today to go." She turned to look at him fully. "And how did you want it to go?" His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Differently. But we rarely get what we want in this life, do we? "No," she agreed. "We don't." The moment stretched between them, loaded with things unsaid. Then her father's voice boomed from the other end of the table, proposing a toast, and they were forced to raise their glasses and pretend this was a celebration rather than a business transaction. As the afternoon wore into evening, guests began to depart. Her family was among the first to leave, her father shaking Luciano's hand with the satisfaction of a man who'd closed a profitable deal, her mother pressing a brief, cold kiss to Lorenza's cheek, her brothers not acknowledging her at all. And then they were gone. And she was alone in this fortress with strangers. The staff cleared away the remnants of the reception with silent efficiency. Lorenza stood in the now empty dining room, feeling unmoored. Luciano had disappeared somewhere, business with his father, someone had said, leaving her adrift in this massive, echoing house. Signora De Luca. She turned to find Signora Costa in the doorway. The title felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. "Your room has been prepared, if you'll follow me." Up marble stairs, down another corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Signora Costa stopped before a door and produced a key. "This is your suite, Signora. You'll find your things have been unpacked." She handed Lorenza the key. "If you need anything, pull the cord by the bed. Someone will come." Then she was gone, and Lorenza was alone again. She pushed open the door to find a suite of rooms, bedroom, sitting area, private bath, all decorated in shades of cream and gold. Expensive, beautiful, and utterly impersonal. Through the windows she could see the sea, dark now as night fell. Her suitcase had indeed been unpacked, her meager belongings arranged in an enormous closet that made them look even more pathetic. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching furniture, opening drawers, searching for some sense that she belonged here. She found none. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection. The makeup was smudged now, the elaborate hairstyle coming loose. She looked exhausted, defeated. "I chose you years ago." Why had he said that? What did it mean? And why, after hours of turning it over in her mind, could she still not make sense of it? A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Signora Costa. But it was Luciano who entered, still in his wedding suit but with the tie loosened and the first few buttons of his shirt undone. He looked tired, too, she realized. The careful control from earlier had slipped slightly, revealing something more human underneath. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have come sooner. My father had business that couldn't wait." "Of course." She stood in the middle of the bedroom, suddenly aware of the intimacy of having him in this space, the massive bed dominating the room between them. Luciano seemed to notice her tension. He stopped just inside the door, maintaining distance. "I know this is uncomfortable. I want you to know that I don't expect—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You don't need to be afraid of me, Lorenza. I won't force anything you're not ready to give." The kindness in his voice undid something inside her, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of him. "What did you mean?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Earlier, at the altar, you said you chose me years ago. What did that mean?" Luciano was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed to the window, putting space between them, as if proximity made honesty harder. "The Rossi wedding," he said finally. 8 years ago. You were 15. I was 21. She tried to remember, searching through memories of an event that had barely registered as significant at the time. You spent most of the reception hiding in the garden, he continued, still looking out at the dark sea. Away from the crowds, away from your family. You sat under a lemon tree and read a book, oblivious to everything happening around you. A memory surfaced, dim, fragmentary. She had hidden that day, escaped the suffocating ballroom for the gardens, found solitude beneath fragrant branches with a worn copy of Dante's Inferno. I watched you, Luciano said quietly, and I thought, here is someone who doesn't belong in this world, someone who sees it clearly enough to know she wants to escape it. Lorenza's breath caught. You watched me? Not in any... He turned to face her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. I wasn't stalking you. I just noticed you. And I couldn't stop noticing you. At every gathering after that, every wedding, every funeral, every business meeting where our families crossed paths, I looked for you. I watched you disappear into corners with books, watched you make yourself small and invisible, watched you survive in a world that wanted to use you up. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Because you reminded me that there was something worth preserving in this life we're born into. Something pure that hadn't been completely corrupted yet. He took a step toward her, then stopped, maintaining that careful distance. When my father told me it was time to marry, that he'd arranged a match with the Valenti family, I didn't ask who. I just said yes. And when he told me your name, I knew it was you. I told him the arrangement was acceptable. You wanted this? She couldn't wrap her mind around it. This marriage? I wanted the chance to know you, to protect you from the worst of what this life demands. His voice roughened. I know that's not what you wanted. I know you had no choice. But I need you to understand. From my side, this wasn't a transaction. It was a hope that maybe somehow I could give you a better life than the one you would have had. Lorenza stood frozen, her mind reeling. All these weeks of preparation, of resignation, of accepting her fate as a sacrificial offering, and the man she'd been forced to marry had been watching her for 8 years? Had specifically chosen her, had convinced himself he was somehow saving her. She didn't know whether to be furious or terrified or something else entirely. You don't even know me, she finally said. No, he agreed. I don't, but I'd like to. If you'll let me. The sincerity in his voice was almost harder to bear than cruelty would have been. She could fight cruelty. She knew how to build walls against violence and demand. But kindness? Patience, the offer of choice when she'd expected only commands, she didn't know what to do with that. I'm tired, she said, because it was true, and because she needed him to leave before she fell apart completely. I need to be alone. Luciano nodded slowly. Of course. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. This is your room, Lorenza, yours alone. I won't enter without permission. My suite is down the hall if you need anything, but you won't be disturbed unless you ask. You're not... She couldn't finish the sentence, but he understood. No, he said gently. I told you, I won't force anything. Not tonight, not ever. Sleep. Tomorrow will be easier. Then he was gone. The door closing softly behind him, and Lorenza was finally, blessedly, alone. She stood in the center of the room for a long time, her mind spinning with revelations she couldn't process. Eventually, she moved mechanically through the motions of preparing for bed, removing the wedding dress, washing away the makeup, brushing out her hair until it fell in dark waves around her shoulders. She climbed into the enormous bed, pulled the covers up, and stared at the ceiling. I chose you years ago. Somewhere in this fortress, Luciano De Luca was lying in his own bed, a man who believed he'd been protecting her from a distance for nearly a decade. A man who'd agreed to marry her not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to. She should be grateful, maybe. This could have been so much worse. She'd heard stories of other arranged marriages in their world. Brutal men who treated their wives like property, who demanded obedience and gave nothing but pain in return. Luciano was offering kindness, patience, space. So why did it feel like another kind of cage? She turned on her side, looking out the window at the dark sea beyond. The wind had picked up, rattling the glass in its frame. Somewhere below, waves crashed against cliffs with the same relentless rhythm they'd maintained for millennia, patient and inevitable. Tomorrow will be easier, he'd said. But Lorenzo wasn't sure anything would ever be easy again. Morning came gray and sullen, the promised storm still threatening but not yet breaking. Lorenzo woke disoriented, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar room, before memory crashed back. Married. This was her life now. She lay still for several minutes, listening to the silence of the villa. No sounds of activity, no voices. The isolation was complete. Eventually, she forced herself from bed and into the bathroom. A shower helped, hot water washing away the residue of yesterday, though it couldn't touch the weight pressing down on her chest. She dressed in simple clothes from her suitcase, jeans and a sweater, armor against the cold that seemed to permeate the stone walls. When she finally emerged from her suite, she found the corridor empty. No Signora Costa, no servants, no Luciano. Just echoing silence. She wandered, trying to build a mental map of the villa. It was massive, far larger than her family's home in Naples. Rooms branched off rooms, corridors led to more corridors. She found a library lined floor to ceiling with books, a formal sitting room that looked like it had never been sat in, a music room with a grand piano draped in dust covers. All of it beautiful. All of it empty. She was descending a marble staircase when she heard voices below, low, male, speaking rapid Italian. She paused, listening. Cannot afford weakness now. The Marino family is watching for any sign. I understand, Father. Luciano's voice, calm but tense. Do you? Because this marriage was supposed to strengthen our position, not it has. The alliance with the Valentis, the alliance is meaningless if you can't control your own household. A wife needs to know her place, Luciano. If you show her softness, she'll see weakness. A pause. Then Luciano's voice, harder now. She's not a soldier, she's a Valenti. She understands how this world works. Don't make the mistake of thinking otherwise. Lorenzo retreated silently back up the stairs, her heart pounding. She shouldn't have listened, but the conversation played on repeat in her mind. Control your household. Show her softness, she'll see weakness. Was that what last night had been? A strategy? Kindness as manipulation, designed to make her compliant? She spent the rest of the morning in her suite, reading a book she couldn't concentrate on, watching the storm clouds gather over the sea. Around noon, a soft knock announced lunch, a tray delivered by a young maid who wouldn't meet her eyes. She ate alone. Dinner came the same way. Luciano didn't appear. By nightfall, Lorenza felt like she was going insane. The silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the wind howling around the villa's corners. She stood at her window, watching lightning fork across the distant horizon, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Another knock. This time, when she opened the door, Luciano stood in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way that seemed at odds with everything she knew about men in his position. May I come in? He asked. She stepped back, allowing him entry. He moved to the center of the room, but didn't sit, didn't relax. I'm sorry, he said. I stayed away today because I thought you might need space, but now I'm wondering if I made you feel abandoned instead. The apology caught her off guard. I'm fine. You're alone in a strange house with people you don't know. That's not fine. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture that made him look younger, less certain. I want to do this right, Lorenza, but I don't know what right looks like for you. I need you to tell me. I don't know either, she admitted. The honesty hung between them. Outside, thunder rumbled closer. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow? Luciano asked. Not a formal thing, just a chance to talk, to get to know each other. She should say no, should maintain distance, protect herself. But the loneliness of the day had been crushing, and the thought of more silent meals in her suite was unbearable. Okay, she heard herself say. Relief flickered across his face. Okay, good. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I meant what I said last night, about not forcing anything. That wasn't strategy, it's just the truth. Before she could respond, he was gone again, leaving her alone with the storm finally breaking outside, rain lashing against the windows as if trying to get in. Lorenza returned to her position by the window, watching lightning illuminate the churning sea. Below, waves smashed against the cliffs with enough violence to send spray halfway up to her window. I chose you years ago. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and wondered if choosing and claiming were really so different after all. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. If anything, it had intensified, turning the world beyond Lorenza's window into gray sheets of water that obscured the sea and sky until they became one formless void. She woke to the sound of it hammering against stone, relentless as a siege. For a moment she lay perfectly still, testing the weight of her new reality. Day 3. Married. Trapped in a fortress on a cliff with a man who claimed he'd chosen her, who'd watched her for years without her knowledge, who spoke of protection while his father talked of control. The contradictions made her head ache. She dressed carefully, not armor exactly, but close. Dark pants, a fitted blouse, her hair pulled back severely. If she was going to have dinner with Luciano tonight, she needed to feel like herself, not the ghost bride she'd become. When she emerged from her suite, she found the villa transformed by morning light filtering weakly through storm clouds. Less forbidding somehow, though no less empty. Her footsteps echoed as she descended the marble staircase, following the scent of coffee to what she hoped was the kitchen. Instead, she found a breakfast room overlooking a rain-soaked terrace. And sitting at the table, reading a newspaper with a cup of espresso at his elbow, was Luciano. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. "Good morning. I was looking for coffee," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Please." He gestured to the sideboard where a silver service was laid out. "Help yourself." She poured coffee with hands that were steadier than she expected, hyper-aware of him watching her. When she turned, he'd folded his newspaper and was studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some." She remained standing, cradling the cup. "You?" "Not much." He leaned back in his chair, and she noticed the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. Leaving you alone all day wasn't— You had business." She cut him off, echoing what she'd heard his father say. "I understand how this works." Something flickered in his expression. Disappointment, maybe. "Do you?" "I grew up in this world, Luciano. I know that business comes first, always." "Not always," he said quietly. Then before she could respond, "Will you sit, please? You're making me nervous standing there like you're ready to bolt." The honesty disarmed her. She sat, choosing the chair farthest from him, watching him over the rim of her cup. "I thought we were having dinner tonight," she said. "We are. But I woke up early and thought—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I thought maybe we could start sooner. Talk. Get to know each other. Unless you'd prefer to wait." Lorenza studied him in the gray morning light. He'd dressed casually, dark jeans, a white shirt rolled to his elbows. Without the armor of a suit, he looked younger, less like the crime boss she knew he was, and more like just a man. A dangerously attractive one, she couldn't help but notice, with those dark eyes and the way his hands moved as he spoke, all controlled power. "What do you want to know?" she asked finally. "Everything." He smiled slightly. "But we can start smaller. What were you reading yesterday? I noticed you brought very few things, but several books." The question surprised her. "Pavés? The moon and the bonfires." "Ah, a man doesn't travel to discover new countries, but to discover new eyes with which to see his own country." He quoted from memory, and her eyebrows rose. "What? You think men like me don't read?" "I think most men like you are too busy building empires to care about Italian literature." "Most men like me are idiots," he said bluntly. "They think power comes from fear alone. They're wrong." "And you? Where do you think power comes from?" He considered the question seriously. "Understanding. Knowing what people want, what they fear, what they'll die for. You can't lead if you don't understand the people you're trying to lead." He paused. "Or marry, for that matter. Is that what this is? You trying to understand me so you can lead me?" "No." His voice was firm. "I'm trying to understand you so I don't fail you." The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. She looked away, out at the rain-drenched terrace where water pooled on stone. "You barely know me. How can you fail someone you don't know?" "By making assumptions. By treating you like what I imagine you to be rather than who you actually are." He leaned forward slightly. "You're not what I expected, Lorenza." "What did you expect?" "Someone more resigned, I think. Defeated. You've spent your whole life being invisible, learning to disappear. I thought that would translate to passivity." He shook his head. But you're not passive, you're just very, very careful. The accuracy of his observation sent a chill down her spine. You did watch me. I paid attention, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? She set down her cup with more force than intended. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you spent 8 years studying me like I was some kind of project, cataloging my habits, my preferences, building a version of me in your head. And now you've brought me here, to this isolated fortress, and you expect me to just… what? Become the woman you imagined? Luciano was quiet for a long moment. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher. You're right. That's exactly what I did. I built a version of you in my mind. The lonely girl who read books in gardens, who made herself small to survive, who deserved better than what this life would give her. And when the opportunity came to marry you, I convinced myself I could be the one to give you that better life. He stood, moving to the window to stare out at the storm. But I was wrong. Not about you deserving better, you do, but about thinking I knew what better looked like for you. About assuming I had any right to decide your future just because I'd noticed you. Lorenzo watched his reflection in the glass, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Last night, after I left your room, Michel, he continued, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my father said, that I needed to control you, show you your place, and I realized he was right, in a way. Not about controlling you, but about the fact that I'm trying to shape this marriage into something specific, something I want. He turned to face her. But what I want doesn't matter if it's not what you want too. And what do you want? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Honestly? He crossed back to the table but didn't sit, standing instead with his hands braced on the back of his chair. I want a partner, someone who sees this world as clearly as I do, who understands its brutality but hasn't been completely consumed by it. Someone I can trust not just with my life but with my doubts, my fears, the parts of myself I can't show anyone else. He laughed bitterly. But that requires choice, doesn't it? And you didn't choose this. You didn't choose me. So wanting partnership is just another way of trying to control the narrative. Lorenza felt something shift inside her chest. All her life, she'd been surrounded by men who took what they wanted without question, who saw vulnerability as weakness and admission of fault as impossible. But here was Luciano De Luca, feared boss of one of the most powerful families on the coast, essentially admitting he'd been wrong. It was the last thing she'd expected. I didn't choose this, she agreed slowly. But you didn't exactly have a choice either, did you? Your father arranged this marriage too. True, but I wanted it. That makes it different. Does it? She stood now, crossing to where he stood, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the faint scar above his left eyebrow. You're still trapped in expectations, still playing a role. Your father expects you to control me, to treat this marriage like a business transaction. Your associates probably think the same thing. So even if you wanted partnership, could you actually have it? Or would that make you look weak? Luciano held her gaze, and she saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Not anger, but something fiercer. Recognition, maybe. You're testing me. I'm understanding you, she corrected, throwing his own words back at him. Isn't that what you said? That power comes from understanding? A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features from intimidating to devastating. I was right about you. You're not careful because you're weak. You're careful because you're smart. Smart enough to know that whatever this is, she gestured between them. It's complicated. You say you want partnership, but partnership requires trust. And I don't trust you, Luciano. I don't know you well enough to trust you. Fair enough? He straightened, putting careful distance between them again. So let's change that. Let me show you who I am. Let me earn your trust instead of expecting it. How? However you want. His voice was steady, certain. Ask me anything. Test me however you need to. I'm an open book, Lorenza. All you have to do is turn the pages. She studied him, looking for the trap, the manipulation. But all she saw was sincerity edged with something that looked like hope. Why did you really agree to this marriage? She asked. The truth, not the romantic version about choosing me years ago. He didn't flinch from the question. Because I'm tired. Tired of violence being the only language we speak in this world. Tired of building an empire on fear and blood. Tired of being alone with no one who sees me as anything other than a weapon or a threat. He paused. I thought maybe if I married someone who understood this life but hadn't been completely hardened by it, I could remember what it felt like to be human. That's using me, she pointed out, just in a different way. Yes, he admitted. It is, but at least I'm honest about it. The acknowledgement was so blunt, so devoid of self-pity or justification, that Lorenza felt her anger deflate. She moved to the window, watching rain stream down the glass in rivulets. I don't know what to do with you. You don't have to do anything with me. He came to stand beside her, close but not touching. We're married, Lorenza. That's done. But what kind of marriage we have, that's still up for negotiation. And if I want separate lives? You do your business, I live in this villa, and we maintain appearances when necessary. She felt rather than saw him tense. If that's what you truly want, I'll agree to it. But I'd ask you to give me a chance first, a real chance, not just a few days. Let me prove that I can be more than just another man trying to own you. How long? A month, he said. 30 days. We spend time together, talk, learn about each other. At the end of it, if you still want separate lives, I'll give you that. No arguments, no pressure. You'll have your own wing of the villa, your own accounts, complete freedom to live however you choose. Lorenza turned to face him fully. And if at the end of 30 days I want to leave entirely, not just separate lives, but divorce? The word hung between them like a blade. In their world, divorce was more than scandal. It was insult, weakness, a breaking of sacred vows even when the vows themselves were lies. She watched Luciano's jaw tighten, saw him wrestling with the question. Then we'd have a problem, he said finally, because my father would never allow it. Yours wouldn't either. A divorce would destabilize the alliance, make both families look weak. We'd both pay the price for that. So I'm trapped. We both are. His voice was gentle, but honest. I won't lie to you, Lorenza. I can give you freedom within this marriage, but the marriage itself? That's permanent, unless you're prepared for war between our families. She'd known it, of course, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way she'd been avoiding. She was his wife. That wouldn't change, no matter what happened between them. 30 days, she said finally. I'll give you 30 days to prove that this marriage can be more than a cage. But I want honesty, Luciano, about everything. Your business, your family, what you expect from me. No more surprises, no more revelations about how you've been watching me for years. Complete transparency. Agreed. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? She looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and scarred from violence she could only imagine. Then she placed her hand in his and felt his fingers close around hers with the same warmth she'd felt at the altar. Deal, she said. They shook on it formally, and when he released her hand, she felt the absence of his touch, like a physical thing. So, he said, a hint of relief in his voice. 30 days. How should we start? You could show me the villa, she suggested. I've been wandering lost for 2 days. It would be nice to know where I actually live. Something that might have been guilt flashed across his face. Of course. You should have done that immediately. He gestured toward the door. Come on, I'll give you the full tour. He led her through corridors she'd already explored and many she hadn't, narrating the history of each room with a mixture of pride and something darker. The villa had been in the De Luca family for 6 generations, built originally as a fortress during a period of particularly vicious territorial wars. It had been attacked twice, burned once, rebuilt stronger each time. My great-great-grandfather used to say that stone remembers, Luciano told her, as they stood in what had once been a weapons room, now converted to a library. Every battle, every death, every decision made in anger or fear, the walls absorbed it all. Sometimes I think he was right. This place has a weight to it. I felt it the moment I arrived, Lorenza admitted, like the house was watching me. It was. Is. He ran his hand along a shelf of leather-bound books. There are cameras throughout the villa, security measures. But I've had the ones in your wing disabled. You have complete privacy there. She appreciated the gesture, but it raised questions. And the rest of the house? Monitored. My father insists on it, and honestly, given the threats we face, it's necessary. He turned to face her. But I want you to know, I don't watch those feeds unless there's a security concern. Your privacy matters to me. What threats? She moved closer to the window, looking out at the rain-shrouded grounds. You talk about attacks, security. Are we in danger here? Luciano was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of honesty he'd promised. Always. The Marino family has been pushing into our territory for 2 years. They see my father's age as weakness, see me as untested. This marriage, the alliance with your family, it sends a message that we're strong, unified, but that also makes us targets. So I'm not just a wife. I'm a statement. Yes. No apology, just acknowledgement. But that doesn't mean you're in immediate danger. This villa is a fortress for a reason, and I have men everywhere on the grounds, in the nearby village, along every access road. You're safe here. Safe in a cage, she murmured. I know how it sounds. He moved to stand beside her at the window. But there are different kinds of cages, Lorenza. Some trap you. Others protect you while you figure out how to fly. She looked at him sharply. That's very poetic for a man whose business is violence. My business is survival, he corrected. Violence is just a tool, one I wish I didn't have to use as often as I do. The vulnerability in his admission surprised her. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and grimaced. I have to take this, business that can't wait. He hesitated. Will you be all right alone for a few hours? I should be back by dinner. She nodded, and he disappeared, leaving her standing in the library surrounded by books and stone that remembered too much. The afternoon stretched empty before her. She explored more of the villa, finding a music room with a beautiful old piano, a conservatory filled with plants that someone clearly tended with care, and finally, a small chapel that made her uncomfortable with its marble saints and bleeding Christ watching from the walls. She left the chapel quickly and found herself back in the library, drawn to the books like always. She ran her fingers along spines, reading titles in Italian, French, English, philosophy, history, literature, an eclectic collection that spoke of generations of DeLucas with varied interests. On one shelf, she found a gap. Something had been removed recently. She could see the dust pattern where a book had rested. Curious, she looked around and spotted it on a nearby table, a leather bookmark protruding from its pages. The collected poems of Eugenio Montale. She opened it to the marked page and found a poem titled L'Anguilla, the eel. Someone had underlined certain passages, the ink fresh enough to be recent. Her eyes caught on the lines. Can you call her sister? A bookmark fell from between the pages, a photograph, old and faded. A young woman, maybe 17 or 18, standing in a garden with a book in her hands. It took Lorenza a moment to recognize herself. The Rossi wedding. 8 years ago. Her hands shook as she stared at the image. Someone had taken this photo of her, captured her in that moment of escape she'd thought was private. And Luciano had kept it, marked his place in a book of poetry with her face. She should have felt violated, angry, but instead she felt something more complicated, a strange mixture of being seen and being studied, of mattering enough to be remembered and yet being reduced to an object of observation. I wondered if you'd find that. She spun to find Luciano in the doorway, still in the same clothes but looking tired now, tension around his eyes. You kept my picture, she said, holding up the photograph. Yes. He didn't move from the doorway, giving her space. I shouldn't have. It was inappropriate, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Why? Because it reminded me that beauty could exist in our world without being consumed by it, that someone could still find escape in a book while empires burned around them. He took a careful step into the room. I know how it looks, Lorenza. I know it seems obsessive. Maybe it was. But that photo wasn't about possessing you. It was about hope. She set the photograph down carefully on the table. You said complete honesty. So tell me, what else is there? What other pieces of my life have you collected? He flinched but answered. Nothing physical. Just memories. Observations. The fact that you always wore blue at family gatherings because your father said it made you look respectable. That you learned to play piano but stopped when your brother said it was a waste of time. That you graduated top of your class but weren't allowed to go to university because your father thought education made women difficult. He paused. That you looked at the sea the same way I did, like it was the only thing big enough to hold all the things we couldn't say. Lorenza felt her throat tighten. Every word was true, every observation accurate. It should have terrified her, this evidence of how thoroughly he'd studied her life. But instead, she felt something else entirely. She felt seen. For the first time in her entire life, someone had actually looked at her, not at what she represented or what she could provide, but at her. the real her, hiding behind practiced invisibility. I don't know what to do with this, she said finally. With you. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A monster, I think, or at least a man who would treat me like property. She moved closer to him, drawn despite her better judgment. But you're just sad, lonely, like me. Lorenza. He started to speak, but she cut him off. The 30 days, she said. I want to use them to understand. Not just you, but this world I'm supposed to be part of now. Your business, your family dynamics, the politics, all of it. If I'm going to survive here, I need to know how everything works. Luciano studied her face, and she saw the exact moment he understood what she was really asking. You want in. I want knowledge. Power comes from understanding, right? You said that. So help me understand. A slow smile spread across his face, dangerous and pleased. My father would hate that. He thinks wives should be kept ignorant, decorative. He'd say I'm making a mistake. Are you? Probably. He held out his hand. Come on. If you want to understand, I'll show you everything. But we start now before I lose my nerve. She took his hand and he led her through the villa to a part she hadn't yet explored. Down stone stairs into what had once been the fortress's dungeon, now converted into something far more modern. A secure room lined with monitors, maps on the walls, computers humming quietly. This is the command center, Luciano explained, closing the heavy door behind them. From here, we coordinate everything. Shipments, territory boundaries, security protocols. This is the real heart of the DeLuca Empire. He spent the next 2 hours walking her through it all. The legitimate businesses they used for cover, the illegal operations that actually funded their power, the complex web of alliances and enemies that shifted constantly. He explained the Marino threat in detail, showed her surveillance footage of their soldiers encroaching on DeLuca territory, outlined the delicate balance of power that kept open war from breaking out. Your family controls the ports in Naples, he told her, pointing to a map. That gives them power over what comes in and out. We control the distribution networks through the south. Together, we're formidable. Separately, we're vulnerable. That's why this marriage matters so much politically. And the Marinos? They want both. They think if they can break our alliance, they can pick us off one by one. He pulled up a photograph on one of the monitors, a hard-faced man with cold eyes. Antonio Marino. He's convinced he can take over the entire coast within 5 years. He might be right if we give him the chance. Lorenza studied the photograph, memorizing the face. How do we stop him? The words slipped out before she realized, we, not you. Luciano noticed too. She saw something shift in his expression. We present a united front, he said carefully. We show strength through the alliance, and if necessary... He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. If necessary, you kill him, Lorenza finished. This is the part where you tell me violence is inevitable, right? Where the romance of partnership crashes against the reality of what you actually do? Yes, he said simply. I won't lie to you, Lorenza. I've killed people. I will kill again if it means protecting what's mine. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, I understand, but I won't pretend to be something I'm not. She thought about that, about the man standing before her, showing her the darkest parts of his world, with unflinching honesty. He could have hidden it, fed her comfortable lies, kept her ignorant like his father wanted. Instead, he was offering her truth, no matter how ugly. I don't think you're a monster, she said slowly. I think you're a product of this world, same as me. We're all trapped in roles we inherited. The only question is whether we have any choice in how we play them. Luciano moved closer, and in the dim light of the monitors, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. And how do you want to play yours? I don't know yet. She met his gaze steadily, but I know I'm tired of being invisible, tired of pretending I don't see the blood that funds our families. If I'm going to be part of this world, I want to be part of it honestly, with my eyes open. That's dangerous, he warned. Once you see clearly, you can't unsee. And this world, it corrupts everything it touches. Then we'll be corrupted together, she said, and watched his eyes widen. Before he could respond, an alarm sounded, sharp, insistent. Luciano immediately moved to the monitors, his entire demeanor shifting from vulnerable to lethal in seconds. What is it? Lorenza asked. Breach in the south perimeter. His hands flew over the keyboard, pulling up camera feeds. Someone tried to cut through the fence. She watched over his shoulder as figures appeared on the screen. 3 men, moving fast through the rain toward the villa. Luciano grabbed his phone, speaking rapid commands in Italian too fast for her to follow completely. Are they? She started. Marino's men. His voice was ice. They're testing our security, seeing how far they can get. He looked at her, and all the softness from moments ago was gone, replaced by the hard-eyed boss she'd expected from the beginning. I need you to go to your suite, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me, understand? What are you going to do? My job. He was already moving toward the door. Go, Lorenza, now. She wanted to argue, to demand to stay, to see this through. But the look on his face told her this wasn't negotiable. So she ran, racing through corridors back to her wing while behind her she heard raised voices, the sound of men mobilizing. In her suite, she locked the door as instructed and moved to the window. From her vantage point, she could see figures moving across the grounds, Luciano's men, forming a defensive perimeter. Rain obscured details, but she caught glimpses of weapons, heard shouts carried on the wind. Then gunfire, sharp cracks that made her jump. She pressed against the window, heart pounding, watching the dark shapes move like pieces on a chessboard. Somewhere out there was Luciano, facing down the threat with the same lethal competence he'd shown in the command center. The violence lasted less than 10 minutes. Then silence, broken only by rain. Lorenza waited, counting her heartbeats, watching the grounds for any sign of movement. An hour passed, then another. Night fell properly, and still no word. She was on the verge of breaking her promise and leaving the suite to search for him when finally a knock at her door. Lorenza, it's me! She flew to unlock it, yanking the door open to find Luciano standing in the hallway. He was soaked from rain, mud on his clothes, and there was blood on his hands. She couldn't tell if it was his. Are you hurt? The words tumbled out. No, not my blood. He looked exhausted, wrung out. Can I come in? She stepped back and he entered, moving immediately to her bathroom. She followed, watching as he washed his hands methodically, blood swirling down the drain. What happened? She asked quietly. We caught 2 of them. The third got away. He dried his hands, finally meeting her eyes in the mirror. The ones we caught. They'll give us information about Marino's plans. Eventually. She understood what he meant by eventually. Torture. More violence. The machine of their world grinding forward. And you? She asked. Are you all right? He turned to face her, and she saw something raw in his expression. I had to shoot one of them. He pulled a weapon, didn't give me a choice. He'll live, but... He stopped, running a hand through his wet hair. I'm sorry you had to see this. Any of it. This is the reality of what I am, Lorenza. This is what being married to me means. She studied his face. The exhaustion, the guilt, the hard-won composure beginning to crack. This was the truth of him. Not the poetry or the gentle words, but this. A man willing to do violence to protect what was his, who carried the weight of those choices on his shoulders. Come here, she said softly. He looked at her uncertainly. Lorenza. Just come here. He crossed to where she stood and she reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. He froze at the contact, barely breathing. You protected us tonight, she said. You did what you had to do. I'm not going to condemn you for that. You should, he said roughly. You should run from me as fast as you can. Maybe, she smiled slightly. But I made a deal. 30 days, remember? I'm not running anywhere. Something broke in his expression then, relief and gratitude and something deeper that he quickly shuddered away. He caught her hand against his face, holding it there. You're extraordinary, he said quietly. You know that? I'm just trying to survive, same as you. No, his thumb traced across her knuckles. You're braver than that. You're choosing to understand instead of judging. That takes real courage. They stood like that for a long moment, the storm raging outside while between them something shifted and settled into place. Not trust yet, that would take time, but the beginning of something, a foundation. I should let you rest, Luciano said finally, releasing her hand with obvious reluctance. It's been a hell of a day. For both of us. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lorenza? Thank you for not looking at me like I'm a monster, even after everything you saw tonight. We're all monsters in our own way, she said. The question is whether we're monsters alone or together. He smiled at that, tired but genuine. Together sounds better. After he left, Lorenza stood at her window watching the rain begin to slow. Below, men patrolled the grounds, vigilant against threats that never truly disappeared. She thought about the photograph in the library, about Luciano watching her for 8 years, about his bloody hands and gentle touch, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous at once. 27 days left. 27 days to decide what kind of life she wanted to build in this fortress made of stone and secrets. Outside, lightning split the sky one final time before the storm began to break, and Lorenza De Luca stood alone in her tower, feeling less like a prisoner and more like someone learning to see in the dark. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm Lorenza hadn't anticipated, equal parts revelation and routine, intimacy and distance, progress and setback. True to his word, Luciano gave her access to everything. The command center became as familiar as her own suite, the maps and monitors a language she learned to read with increasing fluency. But it was the small moments between the strategy sessions that undid her careful defenses. Mornings, she discovered, Luciano spent in the conservatory. She found him there on day 6, surrounded by orchids and jasmine, soil under his fingernails, as he carefully repotted a struggling plant. "I didn't know you gardened," she said from the doorway. He looked up, startled, then smiled with something like embarrassment. "My mother's influence. She used to say that a man who could make things grow couldn't be completely consumed by death. Was she right? I don't know." He returned his attention to the orchid, his hands gentle despite their size. "But it helps. Gives me something to nurture instead of destroy." Lorenza moved closer, watching him work. His focus was complete. The same intensity he brought to everything but directed towards something fragile and living. When he finally settled the plant in its new pot and stepped back to assess his work, she asked the question that had been forming since she first saw him there. "Do you ever wish you could just be this? A man who grows things instead of running an empire built on violence?" Luciano was quiet for a long moment, wiping soil from his hands. "Every day," he said finally. "But wishing doesn't change what we are, does it? We inherit these lives, these responsibilities. The best we can do is find moments of peace inside the war. Is that what this is?" She gestured to the plants surrounding them. "Your moment of peace?" "One of them." He looked at her directly, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You're another." The honesty disarmed her, as it always did. She'd expected manipulation, power plays, the subtle violence of control disguised as care. Instead, Luciano offered her truth, raw and unvarnished, whether it reflected well on him or not. "I should let you finish," she said, suddenly needing distance from the weight of his attention. "Stay." The word was soft, not quite a request, but not a command either. "Please, I'll teach you. There's something meditative about it." So she stayed, and he showed her how to handle the delicate roots, how to pack soil just firmly enough to support without suffocating. Their hands moved in parallel, close enough that their fingers occasionally brushed, sending sparks of awareness through her that she tried desperately to ignore. By day 10, she'd stopped trying to ignore it. They were in the library, rain pattering against windows as they reviewed intelligence reports about Merino family movements. Luciano sat beside her on the leather sofa, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and clean that made her want to lean closer. "Here," he said, pointing to a map. "They've moved 3 shipments through this route in the past week. They're testing whether we're paying attention." "Are we?" "Always." His finger traced a line across the map. "But there's a gap in our coverage here, along the northern access road. We need to either close it or use it as bait." Lorenza studied the map, her mind working through the possibilities. What if we do both? Make them think they've found a weakness, let them commit resources to exploiting it, then close the trap. Luciano turned to look at her, something like admiration lighting his features. "You have a devious mind, Signora De Luca." The title sent an unexpected thrill through her. She'd heard it dozens of times from servants, from Signora Costa, from the guards who nodded respectfully when she passed. But from Luciano's lips, it sounded different, like a claim and an acknowledgement all at once. "I learned from watching my father," she said. "He always said the best victories come from letting your enemy think they're winning right up until they lose everything. Your father is a ruthless strategist, Luciano leaned back, studying her with open curiosity. Did he teach you deliberately, or did you learn by observation? Observation. Women aren't supposed to understand strategy, remember? We're supposed to be decorative and obedient. She couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her voice. But I paid attention anyway. What else did I have to do? Luciano was quiet, and when she glanced at him, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Do you hate him, your father? The question was so direct it stole her breath. No one had ever asked her that before. In their world, family loyalty was absolute, sacred. You didn't question it, let alone admit to hating the man who'd given you life. But Luciano had promised honesty, and she found herself wanting to give it. Sometimes, she admitted, not for being who he is, he's a product of this world same as everyone else, but for never seeing me as anything more than a bargaining chip. For having 3 sons who could inherit his empire and 1 daughter whose only value was who she could be married off to. You're worth more than that. The certainty in his voice made her look up sharply. Your mind alone is worth more than most men I know, and your courage— He stopped, seeming to catch himself. I'm sorry. I'm overstepping. No. She shifted to face him more fully. Don't apologize. I want to know what you think, what you see when you look at me. It was a dangerous question, loaded with implications she wasn't sure she was ready for. But they were past pretense now, past careful distance. Somewhere in the past 10 days, the lines between strategic alliance and something more had begun to blur. Luciano held her gaze, and she saw him making a choice, to retreat into safety or to risk truth. He chose truth. When I look at you, I see someone who survived a life designed to break her and came out stronger for it. Someone who learned to read people and situations because observation was the only power she was allowed. Someone who could have let this marriage crush her spirit, but instead chose to understand it, to find whatever agency existed within the constraints. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I see someone extraordinary pretending to be ordinary because it's safer. And I see someone I want to know in every way possible, intellectually, emotionally, and yes, physically, though I know I have no right to want that. The admission hung between them, crackling with tension. Lorenza's heart hammered against her ribs, her skin suddenly too sensitive, too aware of his proximity. You're my husband, she said quietly. You have every right. No. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with aching gentleness. Rights are legal constructs. What I want is your choice, your desire. Not compliance or duty, but genuine want. And if I don't know what I want yet, then I wait. He smiled slightly, sadly. I've been waiting 8 years, Lorenza. I can wait longer. But his hand remained on her face, warm and solid, and Lorenza found herself leaning into the touch without conscious decision. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. Luciano. She started, not sure what she meant to say. The moment shattered as the library door burst open. Marco, one of Luciano's lieutenants, stood in the doorway looking grim. Boss? We have a situation. Luciano's hand dropped from her face, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. What kind of situation? The interrogation. One of the Merino soldiers we caught last week. He just gave us something big. You need to hear this. Luciano stood, already moving toward the door, then paused to look back at her. I'm sorry, I have to— Go, she said, understanding. We'll continue this later. The promise in those words was unmistakable. His eyes darkened with something that made her stomach flip. Then he was gone, following Marco down the corridor at a near run. Lorenza sat alone in the library, her face still warm where he'd touched her, her mind spinning. She told herself this was about survival, about finding power within constraints. But the truth was becoming harder to deny. She wanted him, not just as an ally or a source of protection, but as a man. She wanted to know what his mouth would feel like on hers, what his hands would feel like without the careful control he always maintained. She wanted to see him undone the way she felt increasingly undone around him. The realization terrified her. She spent the rest of the day in restless motion, unable to concentrate on reading or anything else. When Luciano didn't appear for dinner, she ate alone in her suite, watching darkness fall over the sea. It was past midnight when the knock finally came. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, exhaustion written in every line of his body. But there was something else too, excitement maybe, or triumph. I'm sorry it's so late, he said. Can we talk? She stepped back, letting him in. He moved to her sitting area but didn't sit, too energized to be still. The soldier talked, he said without preamble. Marino's planning something big, a coordinated strike against both our family and yours, designed to destabilize the alliance and take control of the southern territories. Lorenza felt ice slide down her spine. When? 3 weeks, maybe less. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. They've been planning this for months. The incursion last week was just reconnaissance. What are you going to do? We need to strike first, hard enough to cripple their operation before they can launch their attack. He turned to face her fully. But I wanted to tell you first. You deserve to know what's coming. She appreciated the consideration, but her mind was already racing ahead. My family, they need to be warned. If Marino's targeting both of us, I've already contacted your father. He's increasing security, pulling back some of his more exposed operations. Luciano's expression darkened. He wants you to return to Naples. Says you'll be safer there until this is resolved. The words hit her like a slap. Return to Naples. To her father's house, her father's control. Back to being invisible, voiceless, powerless. No, she said immediately. Lorenza, no. She moved toward him, her hands clenched into fists. I'm not running back to my father like some frightened child. I'm your wife. My place is here. Your place is wherever you're safe. His voice was strained. If something happened to you because you were here, then something happens to me. But I'm not leaving. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. You promised me 30 days to understand this world, to find my place in it. I can't do that from Naples, can I? Luciano stared at her, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes, the instinct to protect versus respect for her autonomy. Finally, he exhaled roughly. You're right. I promised. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders. But you have to promise me something in return. When the violence starts, you stay inside. You don't try to help. You don't put yourself at risk. You let me and my men handle it. I promise, she said, then added, as long as you promise to come back to me. The words slipped out unbidden, revealing more than she'd intended. Luciano's grip on her shoulders tightened, his eyes searching hers. Lorenza, don't. She reached up to touch his face, mirroring the gesture he'd made earlier in the library. Don't tell me it's too soon or that I don't really know you. These past 10 days have shown me more truth than most people see in years. And I know... Her voice caught, but she pushed forward. I know that the thought of you going into danger makes my chest tight. That I look for you in every room. That I've started thinking of this place as home, not because of the building, but because you're in it. His breath caught, his eyes darkening with something intense and hungry. If you keep talking like that, I'm going to kiss you, and I'm not sure I'll be able to stop. Then don't stop, she whispered. For one suspended moment, they stood frozen, the air between them electric with possibility. Then Luciano groaned softly and pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers with a desperation that matched her own. The kiss was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was fire and need and 8 years of wanting finally unleashed. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and she opened for him, tasting coffee and rain and something uniquely him. She'd never been kissed like this, like she was air and water and everything necessary for survival. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, wanting to crawl inside his skin. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. We should stop, he said, but his hands were sliding down her back, contradicting his words. Why? Her lips felt swollen, her entire body thrumming with want. Because if we don't stop now, I'm going to carry you to that bed and spend the rest of the night showing you exactly how long I've wanted you. His voice was rough, wrecked. And you deserve better than a first time driven by fear and adrenaline and the knowledge that violence is coming. He was right. She knew he was right. But her body didn't care about logic or timing or anything except the way his touch made her feel alive for the first time in her life. What if I want that anyway? She asked. Luciano pulled back enough to look at her properly, his hands framing her face with aching tenderness. Then I'm going to ask you to wait, not long, just until this is over. Until I can give you my full attention without the specter of war hanging over us. He smiled slightly. Call it incentive for me to end this quickly. Despite the frustration thrumming through her veins, Lorenza found herself smiling back. "You're asking me to be patient when you just kissed me like the world was ending." "I know. I'm a bastard." He pressed one more kiss to her forehead, gentle this time. "But I want our first time to be about us, not about fear or distraction. You deserve that." The consideration, even in the midst of obvious desire, made her chest ache. She nodded slowly. "Okay. But Luciano, when this is over, I'm holding you to that promise." His answering smile was dark and promising. "I'm counting on it." He left shortly after, and Lorenza stood in her empty suite feeling like her skin was too tight for her body. She touched her lips, still tender from his kiss, and tried to make sense of the past hour. Somewhere along the way, this strategic alliance had transformed into something real. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, feeling, wanting. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Luciano mobilized his forces, coordinating with her father to present a unified front against the Marino threat. Lorenzo watched it all from the command center, learning the rhythms of war, understanding the chess game being played with human lives as pieces. But she also watched Luciano himself, the way he commanded loyalty through respect rather than fear, how he listened to his men's concerns, the weight he carried in making decisions that would result in death. She saw him struggle with the violence he knew was coming, saw him tend his orchids with increasing desperation as if the act of nurturing life could somehow balance the scales. And she fell deeper. It wasn't the dramatic, sweeping romance she'd read about in books. It was quieter than that, built on shared silences and stolen moments between strategy sessions. The way he brought her coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked. How he'd adapted his morning routine to include her, the conservatory becoming their shared space. The careful way he touched her, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing hers when he passed her documents, the press of his lips to her temple when he thought she wasn't paying attention. On day 20, she found him on the terrace overlooking the sea, staring at the horizon with an expression that made her heart clench. "Tomorrow," he said without turning. "We move tomorrow." She came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Are you ready?" "No one's ever ready for war." He glanced at her, and she saw fear in his eyes for the first time. "I'm terrified something will go wrong, that they'll get past our defenses, that you'll be hurt because I couldn't protect you." "I'm terrified too," she admitted, "but not of them. I'm terrified of losing you before I've really had you." He turned to face her fully, pulling her into his arms. She went willingly, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "I'm going to come back to you," he said fiercely. "I promise. We still have 10 days left in our deal, and I intend to collect." She smiled against his shirt. "Just 10 days? Well, I was hoping you'd extend the contract. Maybe make it permanent." The casual way he said it made her breath catch. She pulled back to look at him. "Are you asking me to actually be your wife? Not just in name, but in truth?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. Consider us." His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "These past 20 days with you have been the best of my life, Lorenza. I know we started this wrong, know you didn't choose it, but I'm choosing you now, every day, and I'm hoping maybe you're choosing me too." She thought about the girl she'd been 3 weeks ago, resigned, invisible, expecting nothing but a gilded cage, and she thought about who she'd become. Someone learning her own power, finding her voice, discovering that love didn't have to mean surrender. "Ask me again when you come back," she said, "after the violence is over. Ask me in the conservatory, with your hands covered in soil and your orchids blooming. Ask me when we're both certain we survived." Understanding dawned in his eyes, along with something that looked like hope. "And you'll answer?" "I'll answer." She rose on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Now go, finish this, come back to me." He kissed her again, deeper this time, like he was memorizing the taste of her. Then he pulled away, his hands lingering on her face for one more moment before he turned and disappeared into the villa. Lorenza stood alone on the terrace as darkness fell, watching the sea churn below. Somewhere in the distance, storm clouds gathered. Tomorrow would bring violence and chaos and all the brutality their world was built on. But after tomorrow, if they survived, there would be orchids and coffee and mornings spent learning the shape of each other's souls. She just had to make it through the storm. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. Lorenza woke to silence, an unnatural quiet that made her skin prickle with unease. When she ventured from her suite, she found the villa transformed into a fortress on high alert. Armed men at every entrance, weapons visible in a way they usually weren't, faces grim with anticipation. Signora Costa found her in the breakfast room, standing alone by the window. "Signora De Luca," the housekeeper said, her usual severity softened slightly. "Don Luciano asked me to make sure you stay in the secure wing today. He's left instructions that no one is to disturb you unless absolutely necessary." "Where is he?" "With his men, preparing." Signora Costa hesitated, then added, "He asked me to give you this." She handed Lorenza a sealed envelope. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper covered in Luciano's strong handwriting. "Lorenza, by the time you read this, it will have begun. I want you to know that whatever happens today, these past 3 weeks with you have been worth everything. You've given me something I didn't know I needed, hope that this life could be more than just violence and strategy. Stay safe, stay hidden, and wait for me. I'll come back to you, I promise." She read it 3 times, her throat tight, then folded it carefully and tucked it against her heart. The day stretched endless and terrible. She tried to read, to distract herself, but the words blurred meaninglessly on the page. She paced her suite until she wore a path in the carpet, listening for sounds of fighting, hearing only oppressive silence. Hours passed. Morning bled into afternoon, afternoon into evening. And then, just as darkness fell, the silence shattered. Gunfire, sharp and sudden, close enough to make the windows rattle. Lorenza ran to look out, her heart in her throat, and saw muzzle flashes lighting up the grounds like deadly fireflies. Men running, shouting, the organized chaos of battle. She pressed against the glass, searching desperately for any sign of Luciano among the dark figures. But the distance and darkness made identification impossible. More gunfire, an explosion that shook the entire villa, raining plaster from her ceiling. And then a scream, high and agonized, cut suddenly short. Lorenza's hands shook as she gripped the windowsill, every instinct screaming at her to run down there, to find him, to help somehow. But she'd promised to stay hidden, promised not to put herself at risk. The battle lasted an eternity and no time at all. Gradually, the gunfire became sporadic, then stopped entirely. The shouting faded. Silence descended again, but different this time, heavy with aftermath, with the weight of what had been done. She waited, counting heartbeats, watching the grounds for movement. An hour passed, then another. No one came. The not knowing was agony. She stood at her window, watching and waiting, her mind conjuring increasingly horrific scenarios. Luciano lying somewhere bleeding out, Luciano captured, Luciano dead. Finally, well past midnight, a knock at her door made her jump violently. She ran to open it, praying to see Luciano's face. Instead, she found Marco, his face grim and spattered with blood. "Signora De Luca," he said, "you need to come with me." Terror seized her. He's alive, but he's asking for you." Marco's expression was carefully neutral. "Please, come now." She followed him through corridors that seemed to take forever, her heart hammering against her ribs. Down to the command center, where she'd spent so many hours learning the business of survival. Marco opened the door and stepped aside. The room was chaos. Men everywhere, weapons being cleaned, wounded being tended. And there, in the center of it all, sitting in a chair while a medic worked on his shoulder, was Luciano. Blood soaked his shirt. His face was pale, jaw tight with pain. But when he saw her, relief flooded his features. "Lorenza," he said, trying to stand. "Don't you dare," she snapped, crossing to him in 3 strides. She looked at the medic. "How bad?" "Through and through," the man said. "Clean wound, no major damage. He'll heal." She wanted to collapse with relief. Instead, she reached out to touch Luciano's face, needing to feel him solid and real beneath her fingers. "You promised you'd come back to me," she said, her voice shaking. "I kept my promise." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "It's over, Lorenza. Marino's finished. We won." Around them, his men were nodding, grim satisfaction on their faces. They'd won, survived, emerged victorious from the violence that was always waiting in their world. But Lorenza could only see the blood on Luciano's shirt, the pain he was trying to hide, the fact that she'd almost lost him before they'd really begun. "Get him upstairs," she told the medic. "Finish treating him properly. I want to know everything, every injury, every risk." Luciano smiled faintly. "Giving orders now, Signora De Luca?" "Someone has to," she said, "since you clearly don't have the sense to protect yourself." His smile widened despite the pain. "I knew I chose well." They got him upstairs to his suite, larger than hers, she noted absently, with a massive bed and windows overlooking the sea. The medic finished his work while she watched, learning the inventory of damage: the gunshot wound to his shoulder, bruised ribs, lacerations across his knuckles, a cut above his eyebrow that would scar. "He needs rest," the medic said, packing away his supplies. "And someone should watch him tonight. Make sure he doesn't develop fever." "I'll stay," Lorenza said immediately. The medic nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Suddenly, they were alone. The battle over, the immediate danger past. Luciano watched her from the bed, his eyes dark and intense despite the exhaustion pulling at his features. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "I know this isn't—" "Don't," she interrupted, moving to sit beside him on the bed. "Don't give me an out. Don't be noble. I'm staying because I want to, because the thought of leaving you alone tonight makes me feel like I can't breathe." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I was terrified," he admitted. "The whole time, all I could think was that I'd made you a promise, and I couldn't die until I kept it." "What promise?" "To come back to you. To ask you again, in the conservatory, after the violence was over." He smiled slightly. "To finally stop waiting and claim what I've wanted for 8 years." Her breath caught. "Luciano, I love you," he said simply. "I know it's too soon, know you might not feel the same way, but I need you to know I'm not interested in a marriage of convenience anymore. I want it all, Lorenza. Your heart, your trust, your future. I want to build something real with you, something that belongs to us and no one else." She stared at him, this man who'd been shot hours ago, who was offering her everything while bleeding through bandages. And she realized the truth she'd been hiding from herself. "Ask me," she whispered. Understanding lit his features. He sat up straighter despite the pain, his hand tightening around hers. "Lorenza Valenti De Luca, will you truly be my wife? Not because you were forced to, not because of strategy or alliance, but because you choose it? Choose me? Choose us?" She could feel tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't remember starting to cry. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I choose you. I choose this, all of it." The kiss was gentle this time, careful of his injuries, but no less devastating for it. When they finally broke apart, she helped him lie back against the pillows, then settled beside him, her head on his uninjured shoulder. "Tell me about the battle," she said softly. So he did, walking her through the tactical details, the moments of terror, the decisions that had led to victory. She listened with her hand over his heart, feeling it beat steady and strong beneath her palm. And sometime before dawn, with rain finally falling soft against the windows, they both fell asleep. Survivors of violence, builders of hope, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen light. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, so different from the violence of the night before. Lorenza woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar room before memory flooded back. The battle, Luciano's injuries, her answer to his question. She turned carefully to find him still asleep beside her, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen, the lines of tension smoothed away. She studied him in the quiet dawn, the dark lashes against his cheeks, the scar above his eyebrow, the bandage visible at the collar of his shirt. This man was hers now, not by arrangement or obligation, but by choice. The thought made her chest tight with emotion she didn't quite know how to name. His eyes opened, immediately finding hers, and a slow smile spread across his face. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Where else would I be? I have convinced myself I dreamed it. You saying yes, choosing this." He reached up to touch her face, his movements careful because of his injured shoulder. "Choosing me." She turned her head to press a kiss to his palm. "It wasn't a dream. I'm here. And I meant every word." Something fierce and tender blazed in his eyes. He pulled her down to kiss her properly, and she went willingly, careful not to jostle his injuries but unable to resist the pull between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, he groaned softly. We should stop before I forget I'm supposed to be recovering. How do you feel? She sat up, studying him with concern. Any fever? Increased pain? I feel like I got shot and then spent the best night of my life with you. He smiled wryly. So mostly good, with a side of wanting very much to finish what we keep starting. Heat flooded through her at the promise in his words. But he was right. He needed rest, time to heal. She forced herself to stand, putting necessary distance between them. I'll get the medic to check on you, she said, and food. You need to eat. Lorenza. He caught her hand before she could move away. Thank you for staying, for saying yes, for being brave enough to choose this life when you could have just endured it. The gratitude in his voice undid her. She leaned down to kiss his forehead. We chose each other. That's what makes it different. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended peace. Luciano healed quickly, his youth and strength working in his favor despite the severity of his injuries. Lorenza barely left his side, taking over his care with an intensity that made Senora Costa raise her eyebrows but say nothing. She learned the rhythms of his body, how he tensed before admitting pain, how he slept restlessly when worried about business he couldn't attend to, how his hand sought hers even in sleep. And he learned her too, discovering that she needed reassurance through touch more than words, that she woke from nightmares about the battle, even though she hadn't witnessed it directly, that she read to him when he was restless because her voice soothed him in ways nothing else could. On the fourth day, the medic declared him healed enough to move around freely, and Luciano immediately insisted on taking her to the conservatory. You said I had to ask in the conservatory, with soil on my hands and orchids blooming, he reminded her as they walked through the villa, his arm around her waist, more for the pleasure of contact than because he needed support. I'm holding you to that. She smiled, remembering her words on the terrace before the battle. I already said yes. I know, but I want to do it properly this time. He pushed open the conservatory door, and Lorenza gasped. The space had been transformed. Candles everywhere, casting warm light over the plants. White orchids blooming in profusion, their delicate petals perfect against dark green leaves. And in the center, a small table set for two, with wine and food laid out like a feast. When did you... she started. This morning, while you were reading in the library. He led her to the table, pulling out her chair. I wanted to give you something beautiful, something that belonged just to us, separate from duty or danger or anything else. She sat, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, the care he'd put into creating this moment. He poured wine with his good hand, then raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, and to the woman brave enough to give me one. They touched glasses, the crystal singing softly in the candlelit space. Lorenza sipped her wine, tasting sunshine and promise, watching Luciano over the rim. I have something for you, he said, setting down his glass. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. This was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone who deserved it. He opened the box to reveal a ring, antique gold with a deep green emerald surrounded by diamonds. It was beautiful and unusual, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry most women in their world wore. It's perfect, Lorenza whispered. Give me your hand. She extended her left hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the emerald catching candlelight and throwing green fire across her skin. Lorenza Valenti de Luca, he said formally, holding her hand in both of his. I asked you once in the heat of battle, when we were both terrified and desperate. Now I'm asking again, in peace, with clear eyes and a full heart. Will you be my wife in truth? Will you build a life with me, knowing what that life entails? Will you trust me with your heart the way I'm trusting you with mine? Tears blurred her vision, but she could still see him clearly. This man who'd been watching her for 8 years, who'd offered her choice when he could have demanded obedience, who'd shown her that strength and gentleness weren't opposites but complements. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. To all of it. Yes. He pulled her up from her chair and into his arms, kissing her with a thoroughness that made her knees weak. When he finally released her, they were both breathing hard, the air between them electric with want. I want you, he said roughly, his forehead pressed to hers. I've wanted you for so long, and now that you're finally mine, waiting is torture. Then don't wait, she whispered. The medic said you were healed. So take me upstairs, Luciano. Make me yours in every way. He groaned, a sound of surrender and desire mixed. Are you sure? I don't want to rush you. We've been circling each other for weeks. That's not rushing. She pulled back to look at him directly. I want this. I want you. I'm sure. The kiss he gave her then was claiming and tender all at once. Then he took her hand and led her from the conservatory, through the villa to his suite. They're sweet now, she realized. She wouldn't be returning to her separate rooms, wouldn't be sleeping alone again. Inside, he turned to face her, and she saw vulnerability beneath the desire in his eyes. I need you to know, I've imagined this so many times, but the reality of you here, choosing this, it's better than any fantasy. Show me, she said simply. He reached for her slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to pull away. But she stood still, letting him unbutton her blouse with fingers that shook slightly despite his usual control. Each button revealed more skin, and his eyes darkened as he watched fabric part to reveal the curve of her breasts, the flat plane of her stomach. When her blouse fell to the floor, he traced the line of her collarbone with his fingertips. So gentle, she shivered. You're perfect, he breathed. More beautiful than I ever imagined. She reached for his shirt, returning the favor, careful around his bandaged shoulder. When his chest was bare, she let herself look. At the muscled planes, the scars that mapped a life of violence, the new bandage covering his most recent wound. Does it hurt? She asked, touching the edge of the bandage. Not enough to matter. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest, where she could feel his heart racing. Feel that? That's what you do to me. What you've always done to me. She leaned in to kiss the skin just above his heart, and he inhaled sharply. His hands came to her waist, spanning her ribcage, thumbs brushing the underside of her breast through the thin fabric of her bra. Tell me what you want, he said, his voice strained. I need to hear you say it. I want you to make love to me. She looked up at him through her lashes. I want you to show me what it means to be yours. He lifted her in one smooth motion, his strength evident despite his injury, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down gently, then stood back to look at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. I'm going to worship every inch of you, he promised, lowering himself beside her. Going to learn what makes you gasp, what makes you moan, going to make you feel so good you forget every moment before this one. And he did. His hands and mouth mapped her body with devastating thoroughness, discovering sensitive spots she hadn't known existed. He was patient when she needed patience, demanding when she needed him to take control, always watching her face to gauge her responses. When he finally joined their bodies, Lorenza gasped at the intimacy of it. Not just physical, but emotional, the barriers between them dissolving completely. He moved slowly at first, letting her adjust, his eyes never leaving hers. Okay, he asked, his voice rough. More than okay, she managed. Don't stop. He smiled, dark and possessive. Never. He set a rhythm that built steadily, pleasure spiraling higher with each movement. Lorenza clung to him, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion tangled together. This was nothing like she'd imagined. It was better, deeper, more real. When release finally crashed over her, she cried out his name, and he followed her over the edge moments later, his face buried in her neck as he shuddered in her arms. Afterward, they lay tangled together, hearts racing in sync, skin damp with sweat. Luciano pressed kisses to her shoulder, her neck, her jaw, reverent and tender. Are you all right? He asked softly. She turned to face him, seeing her own wonder reflected in his eyes. I'm perfect. We're perfect. He smiled, pulling her closer. Yes, we are. They dozed, woke, made love again with less urgency, but no less intensity. The afternoon dissolved into evening, and they stayed in their private world, learning each other in ways that went beyond the physical. Eventually, hunger drove them from bed. They raided the kitchen together, laughing like conspirators as they assembled a meal from whatever they could find. Signora Costa discovered them at midnight, sitting on the kitchen counter sharing wine and pasta, and the look on her face was priceless. Don Luciano, she said, scandalized, you should be resting. I am resting, Costa. He grinned, looking younger and lighter than Lorenza had ever seen him. Just in a different way. The housekeeper's eyes moved to Lorenza, taking in her disheveled hair, the shirt she wore that was clearly Luciano's, the ring on her finger. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Congratulations, Signora De Luca, she said. It's good to see happiness in this house again. After she left, Lorenza looked at Luciano curiously. Again? Was there happiness here before? His smile faded slightly. My parents, before my mother died. They married for love, rare in our world. My father was different then, gentler. Her death changed him, made him hard. He paused. I think that's why he doesn't understand what I'm trying to build with you. He forgot what it feels like to choose love over strategy. She laced her fingers through his. We'll remind him. Show him it's possible. But his father had other ideas. The confrontation came 2 days later. Lorenza was in the library when raised voices drew her toward Luciano's study. She paused outside the door, not wanting to eavesdrop, but unable to walk away. You're making us look weak. The voice was Luciano's father, sharp with anger. Marino is barely in the ground, and you're walking around like a lovesick boy instead of the boss of this family. I am the boss. Luciano's voice was calm but edged with steel. And I'll run this family my way. Your way? Your way is going to get us killed. You give that woman too much power, too much knowledge. She's a Valenti. Her loyalty is to her family, not ours. Her loyalty is to me. Now anger crept into Luciano's tone, and I trust her more than I trust half our associates. Trust, his father spat the word. Trust is what gets you a knife in the back. I raised you better than this, Luciano. A wife should be kept separate from business, should know only what she needs to survive. Instead, you parade her through our operations like she's your equal. She is my equal. The words hung in the air, and Lorenza's breath caught. Through the crack in the door, she could see them. Luciano standing behind his desk, his father pacing like a caged animal. She's a woman, his father said flatly. She's property, a tool to cement alliances. The fact that you've forgotten that proves you're not ready to lead. The slap of palm on wood made Lorenza jump. Luciano's hand on his desk, his patience finally snapping. Get out, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What? I said get out of my study, out of my house. You're not welcome here until you can show my wife the respect she deserves. You'd choose her over your own father? Disbelief colored the older man's voice. Yes. No hesitation. Without question, she's my future, father, you're my past. And if you can't accept that, then we have nothing more to discuss. Lorenza heard footsteps approaching the door and barely had time to step back before it flew open. Luciano's father stormed out, his face thunderous. He stopped when he saw her standing there, and contempt twisted his features. You, he said, you've poisoned him against his own family. No. Lorenza lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. I just showed him there's another way to live. That power doesn't have to come from fear and violence alone. He stepped closer, and she held her ground even though her heart hammered against her ribs. You think you can change him? Make him soft? He's a DeLuca. Violence is in his blood, in his bones. You'll learn that soon enough. Maybe, she agreed, but even if that's true, it doesn't mean violence has to be all he is. All we are. For a moment, something flickered in the older man's eyes. Pain, maybe, or memory. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. We'll see, he said. We'll see how long your idealism lasts when reality comes calling. He left without another word, and Lorenza stood alone in the corridor, trembling slightly from the confrontation. She startled when hands touched her shoulders, then relaxed as she recognized Luciano's touch. I'm sorry, he said, turning her to face him. You shouldn't have had to hear that. Don't apologize for standing up for me. She searched his face. But Luciano, he's your father. The rift between you is his choice, not mine. He pulled her close. I meant what I said, Lorenza. You're my future, and I won't let anyone, not even my father, make you feel less than what you are. My wife, my partner, my equal. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. What if he's right, though? What if trying to change things, to do this differently, makes us vulnerable? Then we'll be vulnerable together. He tilted her face up. I'd rather build something new with you and risk failure than perpetuate the same cycles of violence and isolation my father represents, even if it costs me everything. Not everything, she said fiercely. You'll always have me. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she poured everything she felt into it, gratitude and love and determination to prove they could make this work. Over the following weeks, they did exactly that. Luciano began systematically restructuring the family businesses, moving away from the most violent operations, investing in legitimate enterprises. It wasn't a complete transformation. They still existed in a world that demanded certain concessions to brutality, but it was a shift, a gradual turning towards something cleaner. Lorenza became his sounding board, his advisor, his conscience when the old ways called too strongly. She learned the business inside and out, earning grudging respect from his associates through competence and fearlessness. When men twice her age questioned her presence in meetings, she proved herself through strategic insight that saved them money and blood. "You're terrifying," Luciano told her one evening after she'd dismantled a lieutenant's poorly conceived plan with surgical precision. "In the best possible way." She smiled, pouring them both wine. "I learned from watching my father, remember? And you. Between the two of you, I got quite an education." He pulled her into his lap, nuzzling her neck. "I'm creating a monster." "You're creating a partner," she corrected. "There's a difference." And there was. Where his father had tried to keep his mother separate from business, Luciano integrated Lorenza completely. Where traditional marriages in their world divided into public performance and private indifference, theirs merged both spheres into something unified. They were formidable together, his strategic mind complemented by her ability to read people, her insight sharpened by his experience, their combined intelligence greater than either alone. Associates who'd initially dismissed her learned quickly that underestimating Lorenza De Luca was a mistake they'd only make once, but with power came danger. The threat arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Lorenza was in the conservatory, tending the orchids that had become her favorite meditation, when Marco appeared in the doorway looking grim. "Signora, you need to come to the command center, now." She followed him through the villa, her stomach sinking. In the command center, she found Luciano surrounded by his top men, all studying a package that sat on the table like a coiled snake. "What is it?" she asked. Luciano looked up, and the fury in his eyes made her breath catch. "A message from what's left of the Marino family." He opened the package carefully, revealing photographs. Lorenza stepped closer to look, then wished she hadn't. They were surveillance photos of her. Walking through the villa grounds, sitting in the conservatory, even one taken through her bedroom window before she and Luciano had merged their suites. "They've been watching you," Luciano said, his voice deadly calm in a way that meant he was barely controlling his rage. "For weeks, maybe longer." She felt violation wash over her, cold and nauseating. Someone had been studying her movements, cataloging her routines, marking her as a target. "There's a note," Marco said quietly, handing Luciano a piece of paper. He read it, his jaw tightening with each word. Then he crumpled it in his fist. "What does it say?" Lorenza asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "They're challenging our authority, saying the De Luca family is weak because I let my wife have power." He looked at her, and she saw fear beneath the anger. "They're threatening to prove it by taking you from me." The room went silent. Lorenza felt every eye on her, measuring her reaction. She thought about panicking, about demanding protection, about begging Luciano to send her somewhere safe. Instead, she straightened her spine and met his gaze steadily. "Then we respond," she said. "We show them exactly what happens when someone threatens what belongs to us." Pride flashed across Luciano's face. "It's dangerous. Everything about this life is dangerous," and she moved to the table, studying the map of their territories. "But hiding me away, treating me like I'm fragile, that makes us look weak. Instead, we use this. Use it how?" Her mind was already racing, seeing possibilities. "They expect me to be afraid, to retreat. We do the opposite. I become more visible, not less. We attend the Castellano wedding next week. The whole family will be there, all the major bosses. We make a statement. You want to use yourself as bait," Luciano said flatly. "I want to show them I'm not afraid." She looked around the room at his men. "We control the narrative. They think threatening me will break you, break us. Instead, we show them we're unbreakable." One of the lieutenants spoke up. "It's risky, boss. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Luciano interrupted, his eyes still on Lorenza. "Because we'll control every aspect. Visibility doesn't mean vulnerability, not if we're smart about it." They spent the rest of the day planning, security protocols, contingencies, signals. Lorenza threw herself into it, channeling her fear into productive action. By evening, they had a plan that satisfied even Luciano's protective instincts. That night, alone in their suite, he pulled her into his arms with barely controlled desperation. I can't lose you, he said against her hair. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lorenza. If something went wrong because I wasn't careful enough, nothing's going to happen, she assured him. We're too smart, too prepared, and we have something they don't. What's that? Each other. She pulled back to look at him. They're fighting out of desperation and wounded pride. We're fighting to protect what we've built. That makes us stronger. He kissed her deeply, and she tasted fear and love and determination. When he made love to her that night, it was with an intensity that spoke of claiming and cherishing all at once, as if by joining their bodies he could somehow keep her safe from all the threats their world contained. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, Lorenza stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. She wouldn't let fear rule her, wouldn't let threats make her small and invisible again. She'd found her power, her voice, her place in this dangerous world, and she'd defend it with everything she had. The Castellano wedding arrived sooner than Lorenza would have liked. She dressed carefully in a gown of deep emerald silk that matched her ring, knowing every choice she made would be scrutinized. Luciano waited for her in the foyer, devastatingly handsome in a black suit, and when she descended the stairs, the look on his face made her feel invincible. You're stunning, he said, offering his arm, and terrifying. Every man there is going to want you, and every one of them is going to know they can't have you. She smiled, placing her hand on his arm. That's exactly the message we want to send. The wedding was held at a historic villa outside Naples, grand enough to accommodate the massive gathering of families and associates. As they entered, Lorenza felt eyes tracking her movement, heard whispers following in their wake. She kept her head high, her expression serene, playing the role of fearless queen to Luciano's king. They worked the room together, Luciano introducing her to bosses she'd only heard about, Lorenza charming and assessing in equal measure. She danced when asked, laughed at appropriate moments, and all the while catalogued faces, measured threats, gathered intelligence. You're a natural, Luciano murmured during a rare moment alone. Look at them. Half are impressed, the other half are trying to figure out how to use you against me. Let them try, she said, but the threat materialized sooner than expected. She was returning from the restroom when a man stepped into her path, older, hard-faced, with cold eyes that assessed her like merchandise. Signora De Luca, he said, we haven't been properly introduced. I'm Salvatore Marino, Antonio's cousin. Ice slid down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral. I know who you are. Then you know your husband killed my family. He smiled without warmth. Forgive me if I'm not inclined to make polite conversation. If you're not inclined to politeness, then step aside and let me pass. Such spirit. He moved closer, invading her space deliberately. I can see why Luciano is so besotted, but spirit won't protect you, Bella. Not when you're as exposed as you are. She refused to back down, to show fear. Is that a threat? An observation. His eyes raked over her insultingly. You parade around like you're untouchable, like being De Luca's whore gives you power, but all it does is make you a target. Rage blazed through her, hot and clarifying. Before she could think better of it, her hand connected with his face in a slap that echoed in the corridor. I am Luciano De Luca's wife, she said clearly, her voice carrying, not his whore. And the next time you forget that, I'll do more than slap you. Salvatore's face darkened with fury. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise, yanking her close. You little... Let her go. Luciano's voice was deadly quiet, but it cut through the moment like a blade. Salvatore released her immediately, stepping back as Luciano materialized beside Lorenza, his entire posture screaming lethal intent. Touch my wife again, Luciano said softly, and I'll kill you. Not quickly, not cleanly. I'll make it last for days. She struck me first, Salvatore protested, but his bravado was cracking. Because you insulted her? Luciano's arm came around Lorenza's waist, protective and possessive. Because you threatened her. Because you forgot that she's under my protection. And threatening what's mine is the same as signing your death warrant. People were gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Lorenza felt their eyes, their judgment, their curiosity. This was the moment, the test of whether their show of strength would work or backfire. You're weak, De Luca, Salvatore said, playing to the audience. A real boss doesn't let his woman have power, doesn't let her speak for him. I don't need my wife to speak for me, Luciano replied, his voice carrying to the crowd. But I respect her enough to let her speak for herself. That's not weakness, That's evolution. Something your family never understood, which is why they're barely hanging on while mine thrives. Salvatore's hand moved toward his jacket, and Lorenza tensed, but Luciano was faster. His gun was out and pressed to the other man's forehead before he could blink. Don't, Luciano said pleasantly. We're at a wedding, Salvatore. Let's not ruin the bride's special day with your blood on the marble. For a long suspended moment, no one moved. Then Salvatore raised his hands slowly in surrender. This isn't over, he said. No, Luciano agreed, lowering his weapon. It isn't, but the next time we meet, it won't be at a social gathering, and you won't walk away. The Salvatore left, and the crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with speculation. Luciano turned to Lorenza, his eyes searching her face. Are you all right? She nodded, though her wrist throbbed where Salvatore had grabbed her. I slapped him. I noticed. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Quite effectively, too. Was I wrong? Should I have... No. He lifted her wrist gently, examining the bruises already forming. You defended yourself, defended us. I'm proud of you. Though I'm also going to have Marco increase your security detail. Luciano, non-negotiable, he said firmly. You were right about not hiding, about showing strength, but that doesn't mean taking stupid risks. We're leaving, now. She didn't argue. They made their excuses to the bride and groom, then left under heavy security. In the car, Lorenza finally allowed herself to shake, adrenaline crashing through her system now that the immediate danger had passed. Luciano pulled her against his side, his arms solid and safe around her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. This is my fault. I should have anticipated. Don't, she interrupted. We knew there would be challenges. We chose this path together. Together, he echoed, pressing a kiss to her temple. But I swear to you, Lorenza, I will end anyone who tries to hurt you. The Marino family, Salvatore, anyone. They'll learn what it costs to threaten what's mine. She heard the promise in his words, the deadly certainty, and she knew he meant it absolutely. When they reached the villa, he carried her straight to their suite, despite her protests, tending to her bruised wrist with gentle hands before making love to her with a fierce possessiveness that left them both breathless and sated. And lying in his arms afterward, Lorenza thought about the girl she'd been a few months ago, invisible, powerless, resigned. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who slapped men who disrespected her, who stood her ground against threats, who'd found her strength through choosing love over fear. What are you thinking? Luciano asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. That I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Of Salvatore, of the threats, of any of it. They can come at us with everything they have, and we'll still be standing. He pulled her closer, and she felt him smile against her hair. Yes, he agreed. We will. Outside their window, the sea crashed against the cliffs in its eternal rhythm, patient and relentless as time itself. And inside the fortress they'd made together, Lorenza and Luciano De Luca held each other and planned for war. War came quietly at first, in whispers and shadows, and careful movements that only those trained to look for danger would notice. Extra cars on the road that shouldn't be there. Faces appearing too frequently in the village below the villa. The subtle shift in how associates greeted them, respect tinged now with uncertainty, as if trying to calculate which side would ultimately prevail. Lorenza felt it all like static electricity on her skin, that prickling awareness of threat not yet materialized but inevitable as sunrise. She and Luciano moved through their days with heightened vigilance, every moment calculated, every decision weighed against potential consequences. Salvatore is consolidating power, Marco reported during a morning briefing 2 weeks after the wedding confrontation. The remaining Marino soldiers are rallying behind him. He's promising revenge, positioning himself as the man who'll restore their family's honor. Luciano studied the surveillance photos spread across his desk, his expression unreadable. How many men? 20, maybe 25, loyal enough to die for him. Another 40 who will follow whoever looks strongest. Marco hesitated. Boss, there's something else. He's been reaching out to other families, trying to build a coalition against us. Which families? Lorenza asked, leaning forward to study the photos. The Russos in Palermo, the Bianchis in Rome, minor players mostly, but together, Marco shrugged. Together, they could be a problem. Luciano's jaw tightened, but when he spoke, his voice was calm. Let them try. The more desperate Salvatore looks, the more obvious it becomes that he's weak. Strong men don't need coalitions. They inspire loyalty through competence. Or fear, Marco pointed out. Fear is temporary. Luciano looked at Lorenza, and something passed between them. Understanding, unity. Respect lasts longer, and right now we show respect by not reacting to every provocation. We wait for him to make a real move, then we end this permanently. But waiting proved harder than either of them anticipated. The threats escalated gradually. Packages delivered to the villa containing ominous messages, surveillance becoming more blatant, even an attempted breach of their security perimeter that ended with 2 of Salvatore's men in custody. Through it all, Lorenza refused to hide. She maintained her routines, attended family meetings, continued learning the business with the same intensity she'd shown from the beginning. If anything, the threats made her more determined to prove she wouldn't be intimidated into invisibility. "You're being reckless," Luciano told her one evening after she insisted on going to Naples for a meeting with her father. "Let me send men in your place. There's no reason for you to expose yourself." "There's every reason," she countered. "My father needs to see I'm not cowering. The other families need to see the De Lucas present a united front. And Salvatore needs to understand that threatening me won't make me disappear." He pulled her close, his arms tight around her. "Your courage is going to give me a heart attack. Then I'll be there to revive you." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "We're in this together, remember? That means facing the danger together too." He sighed against her hair, and she knew she'd won. But the victory felt hollow when she saw the fear he tried to hide, the way his hand unconsciously moved to check his weapon whenever she left his sight. The meeting in Naples went smoothly enough, her father grudgingly approving of how she'd handled herself at the Castellano wedding, her brothers treating her with new wariness that might have been respect. But on the drive back to the villa, as they wound through coastal roads with the sea crashing below, Lorenza felt that prickling awareness intensify. "Marco," she said quietly to the driver, "we're being followed." His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "I see them, 2 cars back. They've been there since Naples." Her security detail, 3 cars total, tightened formation immediately. Lorenza's hand moved to her phone, speed dialing Luciano. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "Coastal Road, about 30 minutes out. We have a tail." She heard him curse, heard shouting in the background as he mobilized. "Stay on the line with me. Marco, get her home. Fast, whatever it takes." "Copy that, boss." The cars accelerated, engines roaring as they took curves at dangerous speeds. Lorenza gripped the door handle, watching the pursuing vehicles keep pace. Her heart hammered, but her mind stayed clear, calculating distances and options. "They're gaining," she told Luciano. "I know. I'm tracking you. We're coming, Lorenza. Just hold on." The first shot shattered the rear window, missing her head by inches. Lorenza ducked instinctively as Marco swerved, returning fire from his window while somehow keeping the car on the narrow road. "Contact!" he shouted into his radio. "We are taking fire." The security cars behind them engaged, gunfire erupting in controlled bursts. Lorenza stayed low, her phone pressed to her ear, listening to Luciano's voice anchoring her even as chaos exploded around them. "Talk to me," he demanded. "What's happening?" "Gunfight. Marco's handling it." Another shot punched through the car's body. Too close. "Luciano, if something happens—" "Nothing is going to happen," he said fiercely. "You hear me? Nothing. You're going to make it home, and I'm going to kill every single person who thought they could touch you." Marco took a sharp turn onto a side road trying to lose their pursuers, but the enemy vehicles matched them move for move. They were being herded, Lorenza realized with cold clarity, pushed toward something. "It's a trap," she said, Beatrice. "They're driving us somewhere specific." "Marco, Luciano started. "I see it, boss. Roadblock ahead." Lorenza looked up to see cars blocking the road 50 yards distant, armed men taking position behind them. Marco's hands tightened on the wheel. "Hold on, Signora." He accelerated instead of braking, aiming directly at the weakest point in the roadblock. Lorenza braced herself, heard Luciano shouting her name through the phone, then impact. Metal screaming against metal as they smashed through, the car spinning wildly before Marco regained control. They'd made it through, but barely. The car was damaged, smoking, losing speed, and behind them, the pursuit vehicles had regrouped, closing in for the kill. "We won't make it to the villa," Marco said grimly. "Engines failing." Lorenza's mind raced. They needed cover, defensible ground. Then she remembered. There was an old church a mile ahead, Stone construction, elevated position. Not ideal, but better than dying on an open road. The church, she said. Santa Maria's. We can hold out there until Luciano arrives. Marco nodded, coaxing the dying car toward their only hope. They made it to the church's courtyard before the engine gave out completely, smoke billowing from under the hood. The security detail pulled in behind them, and suddenly everyone was moving, grabbing weapons, taking positions, preparing for siege. Lorenza followed Marco into the church, the cool stone interior a stark contrast to the violence outside. The security team was efficient, boarding windows, establishing firing positions, turning the sanctuary into a fortress. How long can we hold? She asked Marco. Depends on how many they send. He checked his ammunition. 15 minutes, maybe 20 if we're lucky. The boss said he's 10 minutes out, so we hold for 10 minutes, she finished, whatever it takes. The attack came in waves. First probing shots to test their defenses, then a concentrated assault on the church's entrance. Lorenza stayed low behind a stone column, watching Marco and the security team return fire with disciplined precision. The air filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of spent ammunition. She'd never been in combat before, but terror had a way of sharpening focus. She marked each threat, called out positions when she spotted movement, made herself useful even without a weapon. Minutes stretched like hours, each second a small eternity measured in heartbeats and gunfire. Then she heard it, the roar of engines approaching fast. More vehicles, more men. For a horrible moment, she thought it was reinforcements for Salvatore's forces, that they were about to be overwhelmed. Then Luciano's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by a megaphone. This is your only warning. Drop your weapons and run, or die where you stand. But she risked a look through a gap in the boarded windows and saw him, standing in the open like he was invincible, surrounded by at least 30 armed men. The De Luca family had come in force, a show of power that left no room for misunderstanding. The attacking forces hesitated, caught between flight and fight. That hesitation cost them. Luciano's men opened fire with devastating efficiency, not to kill, but to scatter, to break the will of men who'd been promised easy prey and found a killing ground instead. It was over in minutes. The survivors fled, leaving their dead behind, and then Luciano was running toward the church, his face wild with fear that softened to relief when he saw Lorenza emerge unharmed. He crushed her against him, his hands shaking as they moved over her, checking for injuries even as his mouth found hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and gratitude. I thought I'd lost you, he said roughly. When I heard the gunfire, when you stopped answering, I'm here. I'm okay. She pulled back to look at him. Marco kept me safe. Luciano turned to the man in question, gripping his shoulder. You'll be rewarded for this. Whatever you want, it's yours. Just doing my job, boss. But Marco smiled, understanding the depth of Luciano's gratitude. They returned to the villa under heavy escort, and once inside, Luciano didn't let Lorenza out of his sight. He pulled her into their suite, checked her over again with obsessive thoroughness, then simply held her, his face buried in her neck, breathing her in like he was confirming she was real. This ends now, he said finally. Salvatore crossed a line today. He tried to kill you, and for that, there's only one response. What are you going to do? His eyes, when he looked at her, were dark, lethal, filled with a violence she'd only glimpsed before. I'm going to end him, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happens when someone threatens what's mine. The war Luciano launched against the Marino remnants was surgical and brutal. Within 48 hours, Salvatore's coalition crumbled, as the families he'd recruited suddenly decided neutrality was safer than alliance. Within a week, half his soldiers had defected or disappeared, and at the end of 10 days, Salvatore himself was cornered in a warehouse outside Naples with nowhere left to run. Luciano brought Lorenza with him to the final confrontation, and she understood why. This wasn't just about eliminating a threat. It was about making a statement, showing the entire underworld that the De Lucas were united, unbreakable, and absolutely merciless when it came to protecting their own. They found Salvatore exactly where intelligence had placed him, surrounded by the last 5 men still loyal enough to die with him. He looked smaller than Lorenza remembered, diminished by defeat and the certain knowledge of what was coming. Luciano, he said, trying for bravado, you think killing me ends this? My family will never stop. Your family is finished, Luciano interrupted calmly. The Marinos are done. After today, the name itself will be poison. Because of her? Salvatore's eyes moved to Lorenzo with hatred. Because you're so besotted with your whore that you can't see. Luciano shot him. Not to kill. Not yet. The bullet took Salvatore in the knee, dropping him screaming to the concrete floor. His men reached for weapons, but Luciano's team was faster, disarming them before they could fire. Call my wife a whore again, Luciano said conversationally, and the next bullet goes somewhere more painful. She is Signora De Luca, and you will address her with respect even as you die. Salvatore gasped through pain, clutching his shattered knee. You're weak, both of you, building your empire on sentiment instead of fear. Lorenza stepped forward before Luciano could respond, looking down at the man who'd threatened her, who'd tried to kill her, who represented everything old and brutal about their world. You're wrong, she said clearly. Fear is what made you weak. Fear of change, fear of losing power, fear of admitting that strength can come from partnership instead of domination. You had a chance to evolve, to build something better. Instead, you clung to old grudges and old ways, and it destroyed you. She turned to Luciano. Finish it. He's suffered enough. Salvatore's eyes widened. Wait, you can't just... But Luciano could, and did. The final shot was clean, professional, ending Salvatore's life before he could finish his protest. His remaining men were given a choice. Swear loyalty to the De Lucas and live, or share their boss's fate. They chose survival, as Luciano had known they would. On the drive back to the villa, Lorenzo was quiet, processing what she'd witnessed, what she'd participated in. She'd just watched her husband kill a man, and instead of horror, she felt only grim satisfaction. When had she become someone for whom death was just another problem solved? Talk to me, Luciano said, his hand finding hers. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking I should be more bothered by what just happened, she admitted. I should feel guilty or horrified, but I just feel relieved. Is that wrong? No? He lifted her hand to his lips. It's survival. Salvatore would have killed you without hesitation. Feeling relief that he can't hurt you anymore isn't wrong. It's human. Sometimes I wonder if we're still human, she said softly, or if this world has turned us into something else. We're human, he assured her. We love, we hope, we build things worth protecting. The fact that we're willing to defend those things with violence when necessary, that doesn't make us monsters. It makes us survivors in a world that doesn't forgive weakness. She thought about that as they drove through the coastal twilight, the sea darkening as night fell. Maybe he was right. Maybe humanity wasn't about never getting your hands dirty. Maybe it was about what you chose to protect, what you built with those dirty hands afterward. The weeks following Salvatore's death brought unexpected peace. With the Marino family effectively dismantled, the threat that had hung over them dissolved. Other families, seeing how decisively the De Lucas had handled the challenge, thought twice about causing trouble. And gradually, the villa that had been a fortress became a home. Lorenza threw herself into the next phase of their evolution, the legitimate businesses Luciano had started building before the war interrupted. She discovered she had a talent for negotiation and strategy that translated perfectly to legal enterprises. Within months, they'd expanded their holdings, created jobs, started paying taxes on income that came from construction and shipping and hospitality rather than extortion and smuggling. It wasn't a complete transformation. They still maintained their position in the underworld, still kept soldiers and weapons and all the machinery of violence readily available. But the balance was shifting, moving gradually towards something cleaner. You're changing everything, Luciano told her one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports in the library. A year ago, this family was built entirely on fear and violence. Now we're actually contributing to the economy. We're still part of the old world, she pointed out. We haven't gone legitimate completely. No, but we're moving in that direction. He pulled her into his lap, setting aside the reports. And it's because of you, because you showed me there could be another way. She kissed him softly. We're doing it together. That's what makes it work. 3 months after Salvatore's death, Lorenzo woke one morning feeling different. Not sick exactly, but off somehow. Her body felt strange, unfamiliar. When the nausea hit an hour later, forcing her to run to the bathroom, Luciano followed with concern etched on his face. Should I call the doctor? He asked, holding her hair back as she retched. I don't know. Maybe. She sat back, accepting the cool cloth he offered. I've been tired lately. My breasts are tender. I thought it was just stress, but... She stopped as realization dawned. They looked at each other, the same understanding blooming simultaneously. "Could you be pregnant?" he asked quietly. "I... maybe. Probably." She did the mental math, counting back. "We haven't exactly been careful." A slow smile spread across his face, wonder and joy mixing in his expression. "A baby. Lorenza, we could be having a baby." The doctor confirmed it later that day. 6 weeks along, healthy, everything progressing normally. Lorenza sat in stunned silence as the doctor explained what to expect, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. A baby. A life they'd created together, growing inside her. The thought was terrifying and miraculous all at once. Luciano couldn't stop touching her, his hands constantly finding her stomach, his kisses pressing against her skin as if he could communicate with the tiny life forming there. That night, he made love to her with aching gentleness, whispering promises to both her and their unborn child. "I'm going to give you everything," he murmured against her stomach. "Safety, love, a world better than the one your mother and I inherited. You're going to grow up knowing you were wanted, chosen, celebrated every single day." Lorenza ran her fingers through his hair, emotion closing her throat. "You're going to be an amazing father." "I'm going to try." He looked up at her, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes. "I never had a good model for it. My father..." "You're not your father," she said firmly. "You're better, kinder. And our child is going to grow up surrounded by love, not fear." He climbed back up to kiss her properly. "I love you, both of you, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "We're really doing this. Building a family, a future. Together," he confirmed, "always together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Lorenza's body changed, so did the villa itself. The nursery was prepared with meticulous care, soft colors and comfortable furniture, books lining the shelves because their child would grow up loving stories the way they both did. Luciano personally vetted every person who would have access to the baby. Security protocols updated to account for their most precious vulnerability. But despite the preparations, despite the joy fear lurked beneath the surface, they were bringing a child into a world that remained fundamentally dangerous, no matter how much they tried to reform it. Every threat they faced, every enemy they made, would now target not just them, but their baby. "What if we can't protect them?" Lorenza asked one night, her hands on her swelling stomach. "What if, despite everything we do, this world takes our child the way it takes everyone?" Luciano pulled her close, his own hand covering hers. "Then we'll have loved them as hard as we could for however long we had them. But I don't think it will come to that. We're building something different, Lorenza. A family based on choice and love, not just blood and obligation. That has to count for something." "I hope you're right." "I'm always right," he said with mock arrogance, making her laugh despite her fears. The next test came from an unexpected direction. Luciano's father, who'd been conspicuously absent since their confrontation months earlier, requested a meeting. Lorenza was 7 months pregnant by then, moving more slowly but still insisting on being part of important decisions. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a restaurant the De Luca family owned, closed to the public for the occasion. Luciano's father looked older than Lorenza remembered, worn down by time and whatever had kept him away. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," the older man said, his usual arrogance notably absent. "You're my father," Luciano replied carefully. "I'll always see you. But if you're here to insult my wife again, I'm here to apologize." The words came out stiff, unpracticed. "To both of you. I was wrong about many things, but especially about Signora De Luca." Lorenza studied him, looking for the trap. "What changed your mind?" "Salvatore's death, partially. The way you handled the threat, worked together. I had to admit I was wrong about partnership making you weak." He paused, his eyes moving to her pregnant stomach. "But mostly, it was hearing about the baby, my grandchild, and realizing I'd driven away my son over pride and old thinking." Luciano's expression was guarded. "What do you want, Father?" "To be part of my grandchild's life. To repair what I broke between us." His voice roughened. "Your mother would have loved Lorenza, would have been proud of the man you've become, the family you're building. I dishonored her memory by trying to make you into something hard and cruel when she wanted you to be strong and kind." The admission clearly cost him. Lorenza glanced at Luciano, seeing him wrestle with years of conflict, the desire to trust warring with remembered pain. You hurt Lorenza, Luciano said finally, called her things she didn't deserve, made her feel unwelcome in her own home. I know, and I'm sorry. His father looked at Lorenza directly. I was threatened by you, Signora, by your intelligence, your strength, the way you made my son question everything I'd taught him. Instead of admitting my way might not be the only way, I lashed out. That was wrong. Lorenza considered him for a long moment, then made her decision. Apology accepted. On one condition, you respect the choices we make for our family. That includes how we raise our child, how we run our businesses, all of it. We'll listen to your advice, but the final decisions are ours. He nodded slowly. Agreed. I'm not asking to take over, just to be included, to not miss watching my grandchild grow up. Luciano's hand found Lorenza's under the table, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, giving permission. Then you're welcome back, Luciano said. But father, if you ever speak to my wife with disrespect again, family or not, you're out, permanently. Understood. His father's relief was visible. Thank you, both of you. The reconciliation wasn't perfect. Too much had happened for that. But it was real. And as they left the restaurant, Lorenza felt like another piece had fallen into place, another wound healing in the family they were building. 2 months later, on a clear spring morning with the sea sparkling beyond the windows, Lorenza went into labor. The contractions started gently, then intensified with frightening speed. Luciano transformed into a controlled chaos, simultaneously calling the doctor, preparing the suite, and holding Lorenza's hand through each wave of pain. You're doing amazing, he told her as she paced the room between contractions. So strong, so perfect. I'm terrified, she gasped. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. The doctor is on his way. Everything is prepared. You just have to trust your body. But labor proved more difficult than either of them anticipated. Hours stretched into eternity, pain becoming Lorenza's entire world. The doctor arrived, examined her, and his expression grew concerned. The baby's in distress, he said quietly. Heart rate is dropping. We may need to do an emergency procedure. Fear lanced through Lorenza, sharp and cold. What kind of procedure? A surgical delivery. It's risky, but do whatever you have to do, Luciano interrupted, his face pale but determined. Save them both, whatever it takes. The next hour was a blur of activity and pain and fear. Lorenza felt consciousness slipping, heard the doctor shouting orders, felt Luciano's hand gripping hers like an anchor, then pressure, sharp and sudden, and finally, a baby's cry. You have a daughter, the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squalling bundle. She's perfect. Lorenza reached for her baby with shaking hands, and when the doctor placed the infant on her chest, the world narrowed to the tiny face staring up at her. Dark eyes, shock of dark hair, perfect tiny fingers curling into fists. Hi, Lorenza whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hi, sweetheart. We've been waiting for you. Luciano was crying too, she realized, his hand gentle on their daughter's head, his expression transformed by wonder. She's beautiful. She's perfect. Lorenza, we made this. We made her. What should we name her? Lorenza asked, unable to look away from their daughter's face. Sophia, he said immediately. After my mother, if you agree. Sophia De Luca. Lorenza tested the name, found it perfect. Welcome to the world, baby girl. You're so loved already. The recovery was long. The surgical delivery had taken its toll, but Lorenza didn't care. She had her daughter, had Luciano, had a family built on choice and love. The first few weeks were exhausting, learning Sophia's rhythms, adjusting to interrupted sleep and constant feeding. But through it all, Lorenza felt a completeness she'd never known existed. Luciano was a revelation as a father, gentle and attentive, changing diapers at 3 a.m. without complaint, walking the floor with Sophia when she cried, reading to her even though she was too young to understand. Watching him with their daughter, Lorenza fell in love with him all over again. I can't believe we made her, he said one night, Sophia sleeping against his chest. Look at her, Lorenza. She's ours. We get to shape who she becomes. No pressure, Lorenza teased gently. All the pressure in the world. But he smiled, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Sophia was 3 months old when the final threat materialized. A rival family attempting to exploit what they saw as vulnerability. targeting the DeLucas when they were focused on new parenthood. But they miscalculated badly. The attack came at the villa, armed men attempting to breach the perimeter. But Luciano's security, enhanced tenfold after Sofia's birth, was ready. The assault was repelled within minutes, the attackers either captured or killed. Luciano found the leader alive, wounded but conscious. He dragged the man to the command center where Lorenza waited, Sofia sleeping peacefully in her arms upstairs, with Signora Costa standing guard. "You tried to attack my home," Luciano said quietly, dangerously. "My wife, my daughter. Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you right now." The man spat blood. "The DeLucas are weak. Everyone knows it. You've gone soft playing house with your woman and your brat." Lorenza appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. She looked at the man with cold assessment, then at Luciano. "Let me," she said. Luciano's eyebrows rose, but he stepped back, giving her space. Lorenza approached the wounded man, her expression serene, terrifying in its calm. "You think we're weak because we love our daughter?" she asked. "You think building something worth protecting is softness? Let me explain something to you. Before Sofia, we had limits, lines we wouldn't cross. But now?" She leaned closer. "Now we have something more precious than our own lives. And that doesn't make us weak. It makes us absolutely ruthless to anyone who threatens what's ours." She straightened. "Luciano won't kill you, I will. Because I want everyone who hears about this to know the woman you called weak, the mother you thought you could exploit, she's the one who ended you. And she'll end anyone else who forgets that the DeLuca family is stronger than ever." The man's eyes widened as Lorenza took the gun Luciano offered, aimed, and fired. No hesitation, no mercy, just cold, certain protection of everything that mattered. When it was done, she handed the gun back and turned to find Luciano watching her with something like awe. "Remind me never to make you angry," he said. She smiled, kissing him quickly. "I'm going back to our daughter. Make sure everyone knows what happened here, and why." He nodded, understanding the message she was sending. The DeLucas weren't weak, they were evolved. They'd built something worth dying for, and they'd absolutely kill anyone who threatened it. Word spread quickly. The family that had attacked limped away broken, their leader dead by Lorenza's hand, their reputation destroyed. And in the aftermath, something shifted in how other families viewed the DeLucas. Not as weakened by love, but as strengthened by it. More dangerous because they had something precious to protect. Months passed, then years. Sofia grew from infant to toddler, bright and curious and loved beyond measure. The villa that had once felt like a fortress transformed into a real home, filled with laughter and music and the chaos of family life. Luciano gradually transitioned more of their operations to legitimate businesses, using his position to protect rather than exploit. The violence didn't disappear. It never could, not completely, but it diminished, becoming the exception rather than the rule. And through it all, Lorenza and Luciano built something that had seemed impossible that first day when she arrived at the villa, alone and terrified. A partnership of equals, a love that survived violence and danger, a family chosen as much as inherited. On their 5th anniversary, Luciano took her back to the conservatory where he'd first properly proposed. The orchids were blooming, the air sweet with their fragrance. 5 years, he said, pulling her into his arms. 5 years since you said yes. Since you chose this life, chose me. Best decision I ever made, she said honestly. Even with everything, the danger, the violence, the constant threat, especially with all of that. She touched his face, seeing the lines that 5 years and fatherhood had carved there, loving everyone. Because we faced it together. Built something beautiful despite the darkness. That villa you brought me to, that felt like a prison? It's home now. A real home filled with love. He kissed her thoroughly, and she melted into him the way she always did, desire and affection and deep partnership all tangled together. "I have something for you," he said when they finally broke apart. From his pocket, he produced a key. "The deed to the villa. It's in your name now, legally yours. I want you to know this isn't my home you're living in. It's our home. Built together, owned together, everything equal." Lorenza felt tears prick her eyes. In their world, men didn't share property with wives, didn't give them legal ownership of anything. But Luciano had never been like other men in their world. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this. For everything. for seeing me when I thought I was invisible, for giving me choice when I expected only commands, for loving me enough to change everything. You changed me, he corrected, made me better, made me want to be better. He rested his forehead against hers. I spent 8 years watching you from a distance, wondering what it would be like to know you. And the reality is so much better than anything I imagined. You're my partner, my equal, the love of my life. I'd choose you 1,000 times over. Just 1,000? 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000, every lifetime, every version of ourselves. I'd always choose you. They stood together in the conservatory as evening fell, the scent of orchids surrounding them, the villa humming with life beyond the glass walls. Upstairs, Sofia would be having dinner with Signora Costa, probably making a mess, definitely making them laugh later with her stories. This was the life they'd built. Imperfect, complicated, still touched by darkness, but fundamentally transformed by love. Lorenza thought about the girl she'd been, arriving at this villa resigned to a loveless marriage, expecting nothing but survival. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, choosing her future every single day. "Come on," she said, lacing her fingers through Luciano's. "Let's go home. Our daughter will be wondering where we are." "Home," he echoed, and in his voice she heard all the same wonder she felt. They left the conservatory hand in hand, walking back toward the lights of the villa where their daughter waited, where their future was being written in laughter and love and the quiet revolution of two people who'd chosen each other against all odds. The sea crashed against the cliffs below, eternal and patient. And inside the fortress they'd made their sanctuary, Lorenza and Luciano De Luca walked into their next chapter together. Survivors, lovers, partners in building something that would outlast them both. A family. A legacy. A love story that began in silence but would echo through generations. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.